Chapter 1185. Kardashian thought this way because she was considerate of Roddy. The original Magic Research Department had now been divided into two independent departments of the same level. The department in charge of aviation was obviously more important. The consecutive battles had proven the importance of airplanes in wars. The Strategic Weapons Research Department led by Kardashian had also made rapid progress in the past few months. The experimental series of Mark missiles had been updated to the 37th generation, and their power and accuracy had been greatly improved. They could basically be taken out for mass production. The rapid progress could naturally be attributed to the unlimited supply of crystal stones. But because of this, Kardashian also inquired about the usage of crystal stones during each supply, and realized that the current supply of crystal stones was showing signs that the supply could not meet the demand. If Isika hadn't provided another source of magic crystal, the supply of crystal stones to the laboratory would probably be restricted very soon. But even if Isika could open up the supply, it probably wouldn't last for long. After all, crystal stones weren't coal in the ground. You had to kill magical beasts or search for rare energy gems. Either of them was expensive and the production was extremely low. It was completely different from the endless fossil energy on Earth. Under such circumstances, if she opened another department of the same level, Kardashian wasn't afraid that the resources of her department would decrease, but she was worried that it would lead to a series of serious consequences such as a crystal stone crisis. When that happened, the research of each department would stop, but the efficiency of the newly established transportation line would be greatly affected. Of course, she didn't know that Kardashian was worried about the overall situation. She thought that Kardashian was afraid that she would take up the resources. But at this moment, she didn't rush to speak. Instead, she pricked up her ears and waited for Roddy's answer. Of course, Roddy didn't let her down. He smiled and said, "I know what you're worried about. In fact, she came here to solve the energy problem. Kardashian, have you ever wondered why the magical beasts in our plane have magic crystal and even dragon crystal? Why don't the bodies of the creatures on the elemental plane have such a structure?" As he spoke, he released the earth elemental lizard. Kardashian looked at the pure elemental creature and was momentarily dumbfounded. "You mean, directly from the elemental plane to recharge energy crystals?" This time, it was Marinsula's turn to be stunned. She didn't expect Kardashian to be so perceptive and think of the same thing as her. "That's why I want to establish a department of the same level, and I hope to solve this problem as soon as possible." In fact, it was difficult to support the war against the demonic plane with just the resources of this plane. "I think those fellows from the demonic plane should be invaders from other planes. Otherwise, there's no way to explain why they would risk their lives to invade the current plane." Seeing that Kardashian was still staring at the lizard, Roddy took it and placed it between the two of them. Kardashian reached out and touched it gently. She asked, "It doesn't have a magic crystal, but it has a purer power than a magic crystal. If we can learn this method, can we?" Marinsula couldn't help but look back. Only then did she realize that Roddy's fate was very similar to hers. They had both lost their dragon crystal and became ordinary people. No wonder Roddy had the same idea as her when he saw the earth elemental lizard. When Roddy heard this, he couldn't help but look at Marinsula. This was noticed by Kardashian. She looked over curiously and asked, "Has Wizard Odolet done any research on this?" Marinsula's mouth gaped open for a few seconds before she finally nodded. "Yes, I have some result." "That's great. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you often in the future. If you have any problems in Hollier City, just look for me at any time. Roddy is often hard to find, or he'll have endless meetings. It's extremely difficult to meet him." After all, this concerned the fate of herself and the other 4 Dragon's Elders, so Kardashian's attitude was much more polite. She had always been like this. She was cold to unfamiliar people, but passionate to people she liked. Previously, she was only acquainted with Marinsula, so she naturally wouldn't agree too much. However, when she realized that she had many things to learn from her, Kardashian naturally wouldn't continue to put on airs. By the way, Kardashian is currently one of the main teachers. Her mathematics and physics knowledge system is an important theoretical basis for helping the albatross take off. Ah, is that so? Now that the two former dragons realized that they had something to ask of each other, the slightly stiff atmosphere immediately dissipated. Without needing Roddy to say anything, the two of them seemed to have all kinds of topics to talk about, and they began chatting non-stop. This was also something that Roddy didn't expect. After the car entered Hollier City and parked in front of the Magic Tower, the two of them were still discussing aerodynamic problems. Roddy didn't know if this was a good or bad thing, so he simply got out of the car first. Then he found that Edith, the Arcanist, was already waiting in front of the door and bowed elegantly. He didn't want to disturb too many people when he came back in the middle of the night, but some of the elders of the dragons in the Magic Tower and several leaders of the research department took the initiative to greet him. This kind of politeness came from the bottom of their hearts. After all, they knew that the Prime Minister in front of them didn't just go out for a few months. From now on, the actual territory controlled by the Kingdom of Karen had more than doubled, and they had also saved the dragons and captured the clone of a demon lord. Although they didn't publicize these two things, they all knew what a great achievement it meant. After entering the Magic Tower, Roddy asked Kardashian to directly take Marinsula to arrange a place to stay, and the arrangement of the new department would be discussed another day. Meanwhile, he and Edith briefly discussed the adventure and the harvest of this incident. Unexpectedly, the Grand Arcanist wasn't surprised that Roddy could now control the divine power. He even had a feeling that it should be so. Since the gods chose you in the prison of time and space, I'm afraid the reason is not as simple as it seems. The two of them simply talked about the current situation, and the details had to be discussed at another time. Roddy walked to the top of the Magic Tower and pushed the door open. Only then did he see Akasha and Sally in white dresses. The two of them had been waiting here for a long time. As the monarch, it was impossible for Sally to wait for Roddy at the door in the middle of the night. As for the little priest Akasha, she had a life-saving friendship with Sally. Now her status in the kingdom was almost the same as that of the High Priest Windsor. Even if she did not actually control any religious forces, no one in the kingdom dared to look down on her. Roddy looks to the side and finds that Windsor, dressed in the maid costume of the Kingdom of Karen, is standing aside with her eyes lowered. She salutes him respectfully. Pen Chinese Language Network. Chapter 1186. In the presence of other servants, Roddy naturally had to bow to Her Majesty first. Want free view whole edition, please, Baidu search. Search according to the rules. Roddy bowed to greet her. Sally, who knew that this kind of procedure was necessary, did not stop him. After Roddy bowed, she hurriedly walked up to him. Are you hungry? I asked the kitchen to make something for you. By the way, why didn't I see Marinsura? Sally finally did not feel sick. Her face was ruddy, and her whole body seemed to radiate light. Kardashian has arranged for her. I'll eat something first. I'm really hungry. Roddy went directly to the dining room, took off his coat, and handed it to Akasha, who had already reached out for it. He smiled. Have you been doing anything recently? Akasha whispered, Nothing. I've been waiting for you to come back every day. She blinked her eyes. She did not give any hint, but Roddy inexplicably felt an itch in his heart. He could not help but raise his hand to pinch her soft little hand, and then sat down. The servant next to them served warm roast chicken and broth. Windsor silently followed behind Sally, observing the Prime Minister carefully. But to her surprise, Roddy talked and laughed, and it was all about daily life. He did not have the imposing manner he had in Esker at all. Lockman has been well behaved. He has finalized some new trade deals. Next, the kingdom's main focus is on the construction. If we can keep up with the progress, the issuance of banknotes will be much smoother. I've seen the banknotes, and I feel that it is strange to have my own portrait on it. Sally did not participate in the discussion of this aspect, so she only expressed some unimportant opinions. She watched Roddy eating happily, and instead talked about her recent discoveries in the past few days. By the way, I can now feel the aura of the divine power behind other religious forces. Roddy was stunned for a moment. Tell me more specifically? It's that so-called Moon God clan. I can feel that the aura is completely different from Tapri. There is a very obvious difference. These few days, I even got close to their shrine and tried to sense it. It was quite strange. When I looked at it, it felt like I was looking at someone. I could even feel that the other party seemed to be expressing something to me. However, I stayed at the shrine for a long time and could not confirm the content. Sally frowned and thought for a few seconds. Could there be two gods? There was a battle between them? After all, the Moon God clan had performed miracles before. Maybe it meant that the god behind them was behind them? Are they starting to turn their attention back to this plane? Roddy slowed down his eating speed. After some thought, he checked the mission panel to see if there were any clues. However, there were no new missions, so he replied, I'll have to take some time to study this. I can't come to a conclusion yet. Well, are you tired? After we finish eating, we will rest early. As Sally spoke, she glanced at Akasha. The latter was also looking at her. Both of them looked at each other and averted their eyes at the same time. Both of them blushed. Well, I will go to bed after reading the latest logs. However, Roddy did not notice their expressions. He lowered his head to eat and flipped through the other missions in the mission panel. The one that he had not completed before, Save the Tuck Clan. Now that it was updated to the 5th step, the frame had turned blue. It seemed to be a unique color related to the national mission. The mission's style had also changed greatly. It had become a political mission, such as reduce the mortality rate of Tuck Clan children under 3 years old. There were a total of 7 missions. The general idea was that within 3 years, the Tuck Clan's population growth rate, health level, and life expectancy would increase to a certain level, and the mission would be considered completed. This step should be the final step of the mission, but obviously, the way to complete it was not as simple as killing the boss. For this mission, Roddy was not interested in it, because he could not even take care of the kingdom of Karen. How would he have the time to care about the Isika nation that had nothing to do with him? However, the mission reward was something that Roddy could not refuse, because after completing this mission, he could open the Faith Panel option in the system. Roddy did not know what this option would show, but it must be something related to divine power. Did this mean that he could become a real god? What are you thinking about? Seeing Roddy in a daze with his head lowered, Sally finally could not help but ask. Oh, thinking about the direction of the Isika nation's decision. Roddy replied casually, I think we need to popularize some health knowledge, let the priests do more work, and ensure that the people's standard of living increases. Well, there are many things to consider. I will let the advisors discuss it when the time comes. Do you still care about this? In my opinion, simply sucking blood is not as good as developing together. Since they are the believers of Tapri, they should have a better future. This was obviously a bit pompous, but Windsor's eyes flashed. After all, she was full of pessimism about the future of the Isika nation, but now it seemed that it was different from what she had imagined. After hearing this, Sally wanted to laugh at Roddy, but she immediately realized that these superficial words were obviously not meant for her. So she did not ask more. After a few words, she changed the topic. After dinner, everyone went back to their rooms to rest. As for how they would go to Roddy's bedroom that night, after waking up the next morning, Roddy quickly became busy. After 3 days, He barely managed to deal with the current pile of bills in the Kingdom of Karen and confirmed the next development plan. Marinsura's Elemental Plane Crystal Energy Research Department was officially established. Through a simple demonstration of the results, the spell system left by Solomon had indeed made the dragons realize that they had to expand their research in this area. Thus, the research department successfully recruited 10 dragons and more than 60 mages who were interested in this topic. In the past 6 months, Hollier had become the absolute holy land of magic. Not to mention the Kingdom of Karen, even the mages from the small countries in the east had traveled long distances just to attend an ordinary dragon's lecture. The whole city had spawned a huge industrial chain, and the resulting chain reaction was that mages were unprecedentedly worthless here. And because of this, none of the mages that Marinsura selected were just there to make up the numbers. All of them were good seedlings with potential and above. With the most advanced weapons and technology and the Dragon's Alliance, there was currently almost no enemy in this plane that could stop Roddy. So now his focus was on internal adjustment and development. After finalizing the next plan with the cabinet, Roddy took a plane directly to Elson City. Here, there was a real boss waiting for him to deal with. Chapter 1187. Elson City had changed a lot after such a long time. Roddy looked at the city that now belonged to him, and his heart was filled with emotion. He was able to dominate the Kingdom of Karen and become the Prime Minister because of the support of the Lucifron family. On the other hand, it was the city that gave him the confidence. Although the kingdom had begun to centralize its power, all the income of Elson City was legally in Roddy's pocket. There was a source of cash, soldiers, and all kinds of defense weapons. Even if the Kingdom of Karen was invaded by other forces, Elson City would be Roddy's last fortress. Fortunately, he did not need to face such a harsh enemy now. After coming out of the airport, Roddy sat in the spacious carriage reserved for him in the city. He was not so extravagant as to use crystals for everything. It was only about a kilometer of road. Riding in a four-wheeled carriage on a flat road was not much different from riding in a crystal car. It was Nephi who came to pick him up. The little girl was wearing a red robe today. She sat opposite Roddy and chattered nonstop. Obviously, she was very interested in Roddy's next plan. "Brother Roddy, I still have the permission to read this plan. Does it have anything to do with me? I think Elder Krupus doesn't even let other members of the Dragons see it. Yes, I need your help. That's why I didn't ask you to go to Hollier City. But you can take a plane there and listen to the lectures. Some of them should be very helpful for puppets." Roddy leaned on the comfortable cushion in the carriage and turned his head to look out of the window. Because of Camilla's good management, Elson City did not have many residential areas full of garbage like in Hollier City. After all, the foundation of the city here came from the High Elves. The drainage and sewage pipes were designed very reasonably, and it was rarely disturbed by the weather. It was very comfortable. Compared with Hollier City, which had become the holy land of magic, Elson City was more like a huge transportation hub city. Railways, roads, and air routes all intersected here. At the same time, because 2 coal mines had been opened within 8 kilometers of this area, Kardashian's improved second-generation steam train was put into use here. Roddy looked at the rising black smoke in the distance. He was not interested in thinking about the problem of air pollution. There were only a few similar trains in the entire kingdom. It was too early to talk about it. On the other hand, there were also large chimneys emitting smoke from the river outside the city. They should be specialized smelting and metal processing plants. Vaguely, they could hear the sound of jingle. As he was thinking about this, he noticed that Naife was silent. He asked curiously, "Is there something on your mind?" Naife shook her head and rolled her eyes. She pointed at the direction of the Pasha Magic Tower, and then pointed at her ear. Roddy was stunned for a moment before he remembered that no movement in Elson City could escape Camilla's surveillance. There's nothing you can't say. Why are you doing this? Roddy asked casually. I don't remember your mother being so strict. Naife rolled her eyes and made a face. She did not speak, which made Roddy feel strange. He relaxed and leaned back in the chair. You're going to be scolded even more. If you have anything to say, just tell me. I'll back you up. Brother Roddy, let's talk. My mother actually, duh. There was a knock on the door. Naife quickly covered her mouth and mouthed, Look. Prime Minister, can I get in the carriage? Hearing Camilla's words, Roddy could not help but laugh out loud. That was because the carriage was still moving and the sound was coming from outside the carriage. Camilla was most likely standing on the footboard and knocking on the door. What are you talking about, outside the carriage? Hurry up and come in. He smiled and got up to open the door. When he saw Camilla, he was stunned for half a second. That was because the Guardian was wearing a sky blue dress. She had light makeup on her face and her long hair was coiled up. She had a sharp chin and a pair of big eyes. Roddy even had the strange illusion that if she were to sit next to Naife, he would not be able to tell that they were mother and daughter. When she sat opposite him with a red face, Roddy found that he was wrong. If he said that they were twins with different hair colors, people would probably believe it. After all, Camilla's power had been greatly improved after receiving Khadgar's inheritance. She was connected to the energy of the whole city, so she almost did not age. Naife was 17 years old this year. Obviously, she already looked like an adult. Both of them were at the peak of their beauty. The only difference was their temperament. Seeing that her mother did not hesitate to get on the carriage in such a way to interrupt her, Naife's eyes almost rolled to the sky. She looked to the side and did not say a word. Camilla gently pinched her thigh through the robe, causing Naife's mouth to twitch. Roddy looked at Naife's pouting face and quickly said, All right. Naife has already grown up. What is there that you can't say? That's right. You finally found someone to back you up, right? Camilla raised her eyebrows at her daughter. Naife immediately pretended to be timid and hid to the side. This kind of atmosphere was relaxed. But Roddy looked at Camilla and felt a little guilty. He apologized. I'm sorry. I was delayed by a lot of things and couldn't come. What's there to apologize for? Camilla did not expect Roddy to say this directly. Although she said it was not a big deal, she still looked down. It was not a good feeling to wait here like a stone waiting for her husband. But she was very reserved in this aspect and never dared to take the initiative to express it. Beside her, Naife blinked her eyes. Of course, she knew what her mother was thinking. However, if she opened her mouth now, she would probably be punished by Camilla later. Therefore, Naife pretended to look out of the window and pretended not to hear anything. Roddy saw Camilla lowered her head like an ostrich. He knew it was not good to continue this topic, so he asked, How are the preparations on Kaswara's side? The first stage of memory erasing has been completed by Lord Krupus. They are now confirming it. The next stage will probably start in 3 days. Camilla was obviously interested when she said this. Roddy, I'm really curious about your idea. Can you really use this method to control a person? Oh no, control a person's free will? When I carefully thought about your method, I always felt something indescribable. I even felt a little scared. I'm just trying. Roddy thought for a moment and said softly, Actually, it's normal to be scared about this kind of thing. Because we have experienced it many times. Both openly and secretly we are more or less affected. The simplest one is this. He took out the newspaper that was placed in the carriage. This was the most recent issue. The cover was a group photo of Sally, the first attending the ceremony of the Moon God Clan's shrine in Hollier City. Below it were some official praises. Camilla looked at the content and seemed to understand something. You mean, people will be subconsciously influenced by the surrounding information and be guided in a certain direction? Yes. Roddy replied and said softly, And what we are going to do to Kaswara is actually a deeper level of brainwashing. Chapter 1188. After entering the Pasha Magic Tower, Roddy went straight to see Krupus, who had been busy for a long time. The latter was not only here to erase Kaz's memory, but also to build the half-bit wall requested by Roddy, as well as to build a large enough scale illusion. As a Lord-level crystal dragon, Krupus's attainments in illusion were naturally not comparable to that of ordinary mages. When Roddy, Camilla, and Naifi walked into the half-bit wall in the magic tower, the gloomy rainy sky above their heads and the scattered city buildings around them all surprised the three of them. Boom! At this time, lightning flashed across the sky, and the thunder scared Naifi. She hid beside Roddy, and then found that her mother was looking at her. She stuck out her tongue and pointed at the dripping raindrops on the ground and said hurriedly, "This rain is actually real." Of course, the raindrops did not fall on the three of them because Camilla had formed a protective shield with magic power. The sound of the raindrops sliding around was definitely not fake. Roddy looked up and opened the Witcher's vision, and found that the rain clouds above their heads did not have any traces of magic power, as if they were formed naturally. After looking at the city that was similar to Elson City in front of him, he did not see too many areas with magic wave. Most of the places were like normal cities, and only a few areas could see the light of the magic circle. After walking around like this, there was no one in the silent city at all, and the atmosphere was really a bit strange. However, Roddy walked around with the two of them, and finally stopped in front of a shop in the city. He looked at the old man who seemed to be the shop owner, and then smiled. "The scene is even more perfect than I imagined. Thank you, Lord Krupus, for your help." Naife and Camilla raised their eyebrows. The old man in front of them was too inconspicuous. If they met such a guy in Elson City, no one would doubt his identity. Krupus was wearing a white robe. His bald head was shiny, and the flesh on his face was drooping. He looked like an old man with one foot in the grave. Krupus accepted Roddy's compliment and lamented about his illusion. "Actually, I've built something similar before, but I've never thought of applying it to this aspect. Over the past few days, I had been pondering over the details, and I even felt that there was a possibility that my mastery of magic arrays could improve further. This was a rare harvest. By the way, Prime Minister, I would like to request for the younger generation of the Crystal Dragons to come and participate more. This is a rare opportunity for them." "No problem. We just need to sign a magic contract." "Oh right. I'm actually very curious. Will there be a lot of flaws in the simulated people? You can have a look." As soon as Krupus's voice trailed off, the surroundings suddenly became noisy. There were people trotting to hide from the rain, people whispering about the news of the kingdom, people bargaining in shops in the distance. All kinds of people appeared in an instant. If it was not for the silence just now, Roddy would never be able to tell that this was a half-plane, and that the people around him were all fake. Camilla and Naife's mouths were slightly open. Both mother and daughter had almost the same expression. They looked around in surprise. When a few people passing by saw them, they all avoided to the side, obviously full of awe. This meant that the people in the illusion had similar thinking as a normal person, and not like the NPCs in Roddy's impression, which were like fixed programs that could only repeat a few sentences. He was very surprised and asked, "Is their behavior the result of thinking? Or is it controlled by you, my lord?" "In fact, these people are all human beings that I have seen and observed. I observed their life and behavior for as long as possible, and then I collected these and finally projected them in the illusion. They are operating according to the logic and thinking in my memory, so their behavior is more natural." When Krupus said this, Roddy was really shocked. The ability of the Dragon's Lord was not only reflected in the battle. The information revealed by the few sentences actually meant that this lord had implanted many extremely realistic BOTs in the magic circle. As the controller of the illusion, He had the ability to let tens of thousands of people walk freely in the city at the same time. This ability was daunting to Roddy. He even thought of the world created by Sir Calcius in the prison of time and space on Earth. That was a real one thought to create all things, a manifestation of the ability of the god. Although Krupus was far from that level, he did let Roddy vaguely feel some clues. In order to verify the idea in his heart, he also specially stopped passers-by and chatted with them for a while. He found that he could not find any flaws from beginning to end. Even when he asked about things like the date, the other party would give a definite answer and even ask, "Why do you ask such a question?" He could only sigh at Krupus's superb ability. After finishing his trip to the demiplane, Roddy went to observe the closely guarded Kasvara. The demon monarch was lying unconscious on the bed. His body was covered with a sheet. His long hair was disheveled and his face was pale. Roddy picked up the document that was densely packed with handwriting and read the content. Name: Talia Galen. Age: 23. Father: Marich Galen. Mother: Anna Galen. This seemed to be the information of the only daughter of a middle-class family in the city. It even detailed a series of things that Talia had experienced since she was a child, and even explained how a certain scar on her body came about. Roddy looked through it carefully and discussed it with Krups and Camilla. After that, he took out a piece of paper that he always carried with him and said to Naife, "I will try to choose people that I can trust to carry out the entire plan. If possible, I hope that you can take on a more important role. This is the most important part of the plan. So far, no one knows about it except me. If you read it, then you will be the only one who knows the core of this plan. But before that, I need to ask your opinion. If you are not interested, I will not force you." Of course, Naife would not refuse. In fact, she had long been interested in the whole plan and immediately agreed. But Roddy said with a serious face, "Before reading it, there is something I must make clear. Always keep your own judgment." Naife did not understand the meaning of this sentence, but she also realized the seriousness of the problem. She asked in a low voice, "Will it be dangerous? You have to understand that everything is not to deceive, but to persuade." Roddy raised his hand and whispered, "When you are ready, we can start." Naife was puzzled, but she still reached out and took the paper. She lowered her head and quickly read it once. After that, she raised her head and was stunned. When she looked at Roddy again, she even felt a strange sense of unreality. Then, she recalled what Roddy said just now, and her panic gradually calmed down. "I understand, Brother Roddy." End of this chapter. Chapter 1189. On the 3rd of May, the situation in the Kingdom of Karen was stable and everything was thriving. The transportation network that was spread out from the 2 nodes of Elsenholier City had gradually taken shape. Due to the improvement and optimization of the grain seeds using nature magic, the popularization of farming and the widespread use of manure, the Cullen Kingdom had changed from its previous situation of the southeast is rich while the northwest is poor. It was foreseeable that after the autumn harvest, the entire western region would definitely be ahead of the eastern region in terms of grain production. The railway to the southeastern King City had begun to be built next to the road built during the Blitzkrieg. The kingdom's port cities along the coastline were all envious of the train railway because this tireless machine was driving the development of the entire country at a visible speed. The first batch of banknotes was also officially issued. The Kingdom of Karen currency was abbreviated as card dollar. 1 card dollar was equivalent to a new silver dollar, issued and minted at the same time in Hollier City. With this as the benchmark, there was an exchange rate with the previously made gold and silver coins in the country. The cabinet, which currently controlled most of the silver and gold mines, naturally would not allow the exchange rate to fluctuate too much. At first, the banknotes, that were only circulated in Hollier City were actually of relatively large denominations and were difficult to circulate in the hands of ordinary people. However, these banknotes were quickly spread along the railway and road network by caravan. Because of the powerful anti-counterfeiting craftsmanship, the value of the banknotes in some areas actually exceeded its face value and became the collection of many nobles. At the same time, Roddy also opened the Royal Bank of Karen to issue currency and absorb savings. This process obviously needed time for the people to accept, but it was conceivable that with the rapid development of the commercial economy due to the steam engine, sea routes, and air transportation, the kingdom had begun to run on the road of development. However, as the cabinet's prime minister, Roddy had been attending meetings in Elson City through the long-distance magic circle. Today, when the actors in the demiplane had finished their final training and completely passed the test of Elder Krupus, the brainwashing program of Kaswara, known as the Worm Plan, had finally begun. The demon monarch was lying on a bed with wheels. From today onwards, she was the 23-year-old woman named Teria Galen. After her underwear was changed into a style that matched her identity, Teria's forehead was now swollen with an obvious wound, as if she had been smashed by something. She was pushed by 2 dragons to a residence in the demiplane city, and then lifted onto a wooden bed with magic. Camilla held a list in her hands and said, "The clue items have been placed. Check the outdoor environment, confirm the weather, confirm the date." All right. In the messy environment, every question was answered by a dragons loudly, giving an answer such as, "Yes." When all of this was over, Camilla continued, "Begin clearing the venue. Irrelevant personnel, leave the venue. 5 minutes countdown begins." She turned around and said to the Green Dragon Elder, who had been in charge of Tyria's condition, "You can end the hypnosis." The latter nodded and went forward to remove Kasvara's ears, and a blue vine hanging in front of his chest. He softly chanted a few incantations and then directly left the room. Camilla once again confirmed that everything on the form in her hands was up to standard. She turned her head to look at Teria, who was lying on the bed, walked out of the room and said to the 2 actors, "Don't be nervous. Just follow the plan." The 2 crystal dragons who had finished their makeup nodded silently. Camilla walked out of the room and directly flew upwards, leaving the demiplane through the upper exit. Roddy, who was standing in the control room, reached out and took the book from Camilla's hands. He smiled and said, "You're still trying to persuade her not to be nervous. I think you're the most nervous one." Camilla pursed her lips and tied her hair up. When she walked, she swayed back and forth, reminding Roddy of the serious study commissary from his childhood. But after hearing what he said, Camilla's expression immediately softened. She lowered her head in embarrassment and said, "I am not nervous at all. I'm just afraid of missing something. It's fine. The plan has some redundancy. Now it depends on the target's reaction." Roddy looked at the surveillance screen that had already been set up in front of him. He felt like the director standing behind the scenes. A few minutes later, Talia, who was lying on the bed, opened her eyes. Ouch, her head hurt so much that it felt like it was going to split open. Teria reached out to hold her forehead, and then found that there was a bandage on her arm. She looked at the ceiling in front of her in a daze, trying to recall what she had experienced. But her mind was blank. For a moment, she couldn't even tell who she was, what her name was, or even whether she was a man or a woman. She only vaguely felt that she had experienced many things, but now she couldn't remember a single clue. Turning over and getting up, Teria realized that her weak legs had turned to jelly. She looked around. The room was bright and the bed was comfortable. Looking down, she saw a pair of slender and fair legs under her nightgown, but after looking for a long time, Teria still had no clue about her identity. At the same time, the sharp pain in her head made her feel nauseous. After waiting for a few seconds, the unbearable hunger made her stomach growl. Teria got off the bed in a somewhat strange manner. She walked around in a strange manner, and began to rummage through the drawers around her, hoping to find something edible. But all she could find were some jewelry, dolls, clothes, and even a well-hidden diary that girls kept in their cabinets. Teria quickly opened it and was a little dumbfounded. She found that she couldn't understand what was written on it at all. At this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. Teria stood up vigilantly and saw a slightly plump woman pushing the door open and entering. When the other party saw her, she immediately said in surprise, "Teria, you're finally awake. Don't move around, the wound on your forehead hasn't healed yet." But Teria couldn't understand what she was saying. She could only judge from the other party's expression and tone that she didn't intend to harm her. She thought of resisting and leaving, but after clenching her fists, Teria realized that even walking was a little difficult for her. Throwing her fists to resist was probably not a threat at all. After analyzing the situation, her brain told her that she shouldn't be in a hurry to use violence, because the world outside the window was also unfamiliar, and if she rashly went out, she might encounter even greater trouble. The slightly plump woman saw Teria's vigilant face and hurriedly pulled her back to sit on the bed. After asking about her well-being for a long time, she realized that Teria didn't respond at all. After a long time, she seemed to realize that Teria had lost her memory and couldn't understand her words. Thus, she began to gesture with her hands. Chapter 1190. Are you hungry? If you need, I'll bring you lunch. The maid-like woman pointed at her mouth, then pointed outside, and spoke back and forth several times. In the end, she found that Teria's eyes were wide open, and her fingers were constantly moving at a very strange frequency, looking clearly different from an ordinary person. As the avatar of Kasvar's will, although all of her memories had been erased, the instincts of her soul still existed. Just like the hunting instincts that were engraved in the genes of animals, her subconscious reaction at this time was the behavior that she had when she was a demon. Talia, on the other hand, didn't realize this. She was originally on high alert, pondering how she would retaliate if she was in danger. However, Mary didn't seem to have any intention of attacking her. After gesturing for a long while, she felt that Talia seemed to have been frightened silly. In the end, she stood up and took the initiative to bring a glass of milk, as well as a plate of desserts. Talia lowered her head and sniffed it for a long time. Feeling that it wasn't poisonous, she stuck out her tongue and licked it. Soon, she couldn't resist the thirst of her body, and fiercely poured the milk into her mouth. However, because her movements were too violent, the milk splashed onto her face and chest. This was because she wasn't familiar with the use of her fingers. At this moment, she didn't separate her thumb to grab the handle of the cup, but used her palm to hold the cup by her wrist, as though her entire arm was a tentacle. She didn't realize that her fingers could be used separately. Due to her weak body and weak muscles, she started to tremble after a few seconds. Seeing this, Mary hurriedly reached out to support her. Hey. Slow down. What's wrong with your hand? Are you hurt too? As she spoke, she took the cup and held it firmly to feed Talia. The latter was originally a little vigilant, but now she finally relaxed. After eating and drinking, Talia felt much better in her stomach, but she was even more confused about where she was. She couldn't speak or read, and even her steps were crooked. This feeling was really uncomfortable. Mary patiently wiped her mouth clean and helped her change into a new nightgown. Then, she laid her back on the bed and muttered a bunch of words that Teria couldn't understand. Then, she left the room and closed the door. Teria stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Her stomach felt much better after eating the food, but her body instinctively began to feel sleepy. At first, she tried to keep her eyes open and stay alert, but it didn't take long for Teria to succumb to the growing drowsiness and fall into a deep sleep. Outside the demiplane, Camilla heaved a heavy sigh of relief. Although Talia had fallen asleep after a meal, everyone present, including the dragons, were staring at the screen, that displayed the situation in the room with trepidation. Even the most composed Krupus had his fists clenched from start to finish, not uttering a single word. "All right, everyone, relax. It seems that the target has retained some demonic characteristics, using tentacles to use a human body, and being vigilant when observing the surroundings. This means that the living environment in the demonic plane isn't stable, so these instincts still exist. The good news is that the target doesn't seem to have recalled anything, which proves that the memory erasure was successful." After Roddy finished speaking, he exchanged opinions with Krupus. Both of them were actually more like researchers, exploring and making mistakes in unknown areas. What they could do at the moment was to record everything they observed as much as possible. Crystal Dragon Lord once again checked the scene in the illusion, closed his eyes, and carefully recalled all the details just now. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he nodded and said, "Prime Minister Roddy, the beginning of the plan seems to be successful. It's going smoother than I thought." Roddy nodded, but after saying this, he raised his eyebrows. This was because a prompt box finally appeared in the mission bar, and a new mission prompt appeared on it: Worm Plan. This system obviously used the name that Roddy had set himself. The mission content was simple and crude. It is extremely difficult to change one's mind. Even if the demon monarch's strength is weakened, he is still an outstanding existence in the entire plane. Once he loses control, the consequences will be unimaginable. Mission objective: change Kazwara's self-identity, incomplete, mission reward, free will. Roddy clicked on the description and found that this passive skill was extremely powerful: complete immunity to all spiritual spells and all illusion interference. Because it was a passive skill, it meant that Roddy did not need to consume any mana or energy to achieve this effect. In other words, Roddy would no longer be confused by any illusion or spiritual shock spells in the future. He would be able to see the essence of things directly at any time. However, the more powerful the reward, Roddy understood the difficulty of this mission. It was shown in dark red in the mission bar, which obviously meant that even with the help of all the dragons, he still had a high probability of failure. Roddy was already used to this kind of mission. At this time, he was not worried about Talia's backlash or anything else. This was because as time passed, the believers of Isika had accumulated enough wish power for him. Under the control of the divine territory, Roddy believed that even if the demon lord personally came, he would still have the power to fight. This was the reason why he was calm at this time. However, Camilla and the others still could not relax. Their eyes were glued to the screen, for fear that Talia would suddenly wake up and go berserk. Roddy raised his hand and patted her on the shoulder. "All right, everyone, just follow the schedule and keep an eye on her. If you keep an eye on her every day, it'll be easy for things to go wrong. Everyone, take a rest. Don't be too nervous. Remember, Kazvala is no different from an ordinary person now. Even if he escapes from the demiplane, or even the Pasha Magic Tower, he won't be able to escape the eyes of Camilla and I in Elson City." As a leader, Roddy now specifically emphasized relax, not because he did not take it seriously, but because the whole plan might take a year or even several years to complete. Reasonable arrangements and careful planning were the most important. Krupus also knew this, and turned around to communicate with his dragons. The control room that was originally full of people finally returned to normal. It was not until 4 hours later that Talia woke up again, and the sound of the notification made everyone immediately perk up. Weather conditions confirmed. Nearby personnel arrangements confirmed. Adjust the sunlight intensity. It's a little bright now. Alright, personnel enter. In the demiplane, Talia, who lived in the virtual world, did not realize that she was in a film set. She still stood up instinctively and pushed open the bedroom door. After leaving the demiplane, the Pasha Magic Tower, and Elson City, in a mage tower in the far east of the Kingdom of Karen, a portal containing the fluctuations of the demiplane was slowly opening. Chapter 1191. I did it. Wizard Dallas looked excitedly at the dimensional crack in front of him. His face was full of stubble, and he wore a worthless gray robe. He was a mediocre wizard in the Kowloon Kingdom. His level was not high, and he had barely reached the threshold of a high-ranked wizard. The reason he was able to activate the realm portal was not entirely due to his own efforts. 2 years ago, Darth had discovered a high elf ruin near his mage tower and dug out a magic circle that could connect to other realms. It took him more than a year to study how to activate the magic circle. As the situation in the kingdom had changed, Darth, as a senior mage, naturally had to take a side. However, before he could enjoy anything after he stood on the side of the old nobles, he found that the royal family had fallen. Because the nobles' power had been taken back and their income had dropped, the nobles who supported him had no choice but to stop providing him with funds. Darth was forced to leave and find another way to make a living. Now, his main source of income was selling magic circles and scrolls. He squatted in a stone tower in the middle of nowhere and barely made ends meet. So the place he lived in could only be called a mage tower. It was completely different from the magic towers in Elson City and Hollier City. It was a true mage tower. Other than a simple laboratory, it had no other functions. But now, after studying the High Elf print for a long time, Darth was lucky enough to activate the magic circle. However, the charging crystals he used were too expensive. Other than activating the magic circle, he would have to spend all his money to buy more crystals. But now, Darth was not thinking about what was in the other realm. He looked at the light of the magic circle and was instantly excited. If he sold this thing in a nearby town, he would definitely have the funds to continue his magic research. He knew the limits of his abilities. The topic of realm portal was something that dragons and magicians needed to consider. He had no money or resources. Even if he wanted to, he could not do it. Now, he was just trying to activate it. After confirming that there were no problems with the magic circle, he happily planned to close it. But halfway through his action, Darth suddenly looked up at the blurred brilliance of the plane crack in front of him. He felt that he suddenly had a bold idea. If he could gather enough crystal stones and try to explore that plane, he might be able to obtain more rare treasures and exchange them for more gold coins. This was an inexhaustible treasure. Why should he just sell it? That's true. Darcy blinked his eyes and felt that he was really short-sighted. Therefore, he turned off the array, intending to see how many more crystals he could buy. However, when his gaze swept across the table, he remembered that he had not read the newspaper that the servant had delivered today, and there seemed to be some kind of array printed on the cover. He picked it up and glanced at it, only to find that the front page said, Hollier City Magical Items and Props Exhibition expected to open within the month. The magic formation in the image was a relic from the High Elves era that was similar in style to the one in front of him. Below it was a line of small words. Whether it's an innovative creation or an antique, there will be buyers in Hollier City. The High Elves magic formation in the image has been sold at the Silver Wings auction house for 150,000 kilocalories. Gulp. Darth immediately swallowed his saliva because he now knew that the value of card dollars was very shocking. 150,000 card dollars was enough for him to arm his laboratory to the teeth. He could even build a small, magic tower by saving a single dollar. The thought from before was still lingering in his mind. After all, no one could say for sure what was on the other side of the portal. What if he could just casually fish something out and sell it for tens of thousands of kcal? But when he flipped to the second page of the newspaper, Darcy immediately gave up on this idea. This was because this exhibition had a very detailed classification, ranging from large magic formation scrolls to living magical beasts, to small rare magic crystal or energy bodies. There were specialized appraisal and exhibition venues for them. At that time, the people in charge of the audit and evaluation were all magisters and even dragons. Among them, the space teleportation array was highlighted, verified to be a magic formation that can communicate with another plane. The seller will be awarded the title of Hollier City's honorary magician, and will receive the opportunity to study in the Magic Tower for a year. All expenses will be borne by the Magic Research Department of the Kingdom of Karen, effective immediately. Seeing this, Darcy did not say another word. He packed up his things and left the Mage Tower with the magic formation. Rather than collecting expensive rechargeable crystals to try and activate the unknown magic formation, he felt that directly handing the items over to Hollier City was a more correct choice. This way, not only would the consequences of his failure to stand on the right side be written off, he could even get the opportunity to study in the Mage Tower free of food and lodging fees. These were not things that money could buy. Right now, everyone knew that Hollier City was the center of magic in the entire kingdom, and even the world. As a member of the Circle of Magicians, Darcy naturally had a deeper understanding of this. The newest magic theories, magic formation principles, and even the copyright rights to protect the inventions of the magicians were all implemented from Hollier City. The interests of the magicians were unprecedentedly protected, and the overall academic standards had taken a huge step forward in the past 2 years. As a high-ranked magician who stood at the edge of the circle, Darcy had already realized that if he did not keep up, he would very likely be left behind in this high-speed chariot and completely fall behind the times. So he was a little anxious at this moment. After realizing that he could connect with Hollier City, Darcy could not wait to fly over right now. Obviously, after a long period of publicity, the demonstration effect and authority of Hollier City had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. After Darcy made his decision, he immediately began to pack his clothes and brought along a few days' worth of dry rations. With the mood of a pilgrimage, he left the Mage Tower, bringing along his only apprentice, or rather, servant on the road. He originally thought that he would have to rent a carriage and spend a lot of money to reach Hollier City on the other side of the kingdom. Unexpectedly, when he arrived at the nearby town, he found out that the road had already connected the east and west of the kingdom, and that the kingdom's transportation company was conducting experimental passenger transport and had opened up passenger seats. Darcy inquired about the price, and found out that the public carriage was almost 70% cheaper than his own chariot, so he spent some money to buy a ticket, and then arrived at a courier station called Mission Will Arrive. The next morning, after being reminded by the staff, he carried his luggage and brought along his servant to board the long-distance carriage that had 6 wheels and could carry 12 people at a time. Because of the metal bearings and lubricant maintenance, the speed and stability of the carriage far exceeded Darcy's imagination. After only 2 days of riding, the carriage changed horses 4 times at the courier station midway, and finally arrived at its final destination, Hollier City, along the flat road. Along the way, Darcy did feel that the surroundings were getting more and more desolate, but as soon as he entered Efta, the sight of farms and smoke from countless villages made his mouth drop open. After arriving at the holy land of his heart, Hollier City, he found out that everything here was even more exaggerated than he had imagined. The density of magicians in the city was unbelievably high, and when he found the official plain circle identification office of Hollier City, he found out that he actually had to get a number and queue up, because the people who came to hand in the teleportation circle were already lining up. Chapter 1192. Number 34. Here. I'll be right there. Hearing the number being called, Dars hurriedly asked his servant to pick up the small magic circle and entered the appraisal room in front of him. In fact, he was already a little nervous because many of the people who queued up to enter the room came out dejectedly. It was obvious that they did not get a satisfactory result. Dars was originally filled with confidence, but now he was truly nervous. His identity as a high-level mage, that he was proud of in other regions, was unable to provide any help. That was because the people standing in the appraisal room in front of him were 2 dragons and an archmage. Mage Dars? Yes, we just want to confirm your identity. All right, please show us your magic circle. There are recharging crystals here, you can use them as you wish. Yes, sir. Dar's voice trembled as he faced the 2 guys with dragon horns. However, in order to qualify to enter the magic tower, he still tried to calm his mind and prepared to activate the magic circle. The few people in front of him quietly took a step back and hid behind an invisible barrier. When the fluctuation of the demonic plane appeared, a warning magic circle at the side immediately lit up. The 2 dragons and the Magister did not change their expressions and immediately said, "All right, Mage Dars, your magic circle has passed the inspection. You can close it now." It passed just like that? Dars was stunned for a moment and stood up while closing the magic circle. He was a little excited. Then, the Magister walked out of the shielding barrier and said, "It's like this, the promises we made in the newspaper are all valid. At the same time, the research department will buy the magic circle according to the standard price. Your magic circle is estimated to be..." He checked the form in his hand. 13,000 dollars. After that, you can study in the magic tower for a year and enjoy the treatment of a researcher. You can also get a voucher for magic materials equivalent to 50,000 dollars. It can only be used in the tower. If you think it's okay, we can sign an agreement. Dar's heart beat faster. His magic circle was equivalent to selling for 63,000 dollars. Although a large part of it was the so-called voucher, he had heard from the other mages that the magic materials in the magic tower were cheap and of excellent quality. People outside could not buy them even if they tried. He almost wanted to nod immediately, but at this time, a strange thought floated in his mind. Why should I sell it? If he sold it, he might lose even more. Have you thought it through? It's not a problem if you don't want to sell it. There are other mages lining up behind you. You can just leave with the magic circle. No, I want to see the agreement. Dars threw those thoughts to the back of his mind. Any benefit was better than the immediate benefits. The reputation of Hollier was the greatest guarantee. Could their words be false? Naturally, he tried to bargain, but he did not fight for any extra benefits. In the end, under the watchful eyes of the 2 dragons, he signed the agreement. The next second after he handed the magic circle to the other party, the Archmage directly gave him a cloth bag filled with cash. At the same time, there was a brand new badge and proof of identity. From now on, you can enter the magic tower. As for the specific rules, after you enter the magic tower, someone will bring you to understand them. If you want to walk around the city, it's not a problem. Your servants can also follow you into the magic tower. Your living expenses can be paid with your voucher. Dars felt like he was stepping on cotton. He, who had completely experienced the sudden riches, walked out of the appraisal room unsteadily. Then, he heard a voice coming from behind, "Number 35. He suppressed his excitement, carried the bag filled with cash, and left the room with his servant. In the following 3 days, he completely moved into the magic tower. He had a dedicated dormitory, could enter a few large public laboratories to conduct research, and could sign up for classes set up by the honorary elders of the dragons at any time. The academic environment and living environment were 10,000 times better than before. It made Dars want to live here for the rest of his life. And as time passed, there were more than 13 other mages whose fates were similar to his that entered the magic tower. These people, together with Dars, were arranged to listen to lectures or do experiments together. Occasionally, they would even participate in some outdoor activities together. It was said that it was to relax and network. Dars was fine with this. After entering the magic tower, he found that every 3 days, there would be people coming over to ask about his living conditions. They even asked him to fill out a form, which was all about psychological counseling. He improved very quickly in the magic tower, so he could not care about anything else. He only treated it as a routine check, so he obediently filled out the form and handed it in. And on top of the magic tower, Dars had no idea that a group of dragons had long regarded him and the other mages as key research subjects. At this time, from the physical condition to the mental state, to everything that he did, they were being closely monitored. After so many encounters with the demons, the dragons had long understood the dangers of mental corruption. At this time, they did not use the magic circle to interfere or purify it, because they wanted to observe the effects. Obviously, when the plain magic circle could not remove these people, their state was normal. At this time, there was no longer any abnormality. Everyone was researching and experimenting with the spells that they were interested in. No one touched the so-called plane teleportation topic. There seems to be no problem at the moment. Alright, everyone, let's continue to lock the coordinate. One of the Crystal Dragon Elders picked up his notebook and returned to the test bench he had just been operating. Here, they could remotely control the high elf magic circles that had been recovered from the isolated half-plane through the magic circles. The 14 magic circles dug out from the high elf ruins could all be traced back to the demon's plane through the remaining coordinate. So far, it had been confirmed that 10 of them had been controlled by Kazvala's forces. Once they were connected, the user would soon be subjected to mental interference from the other plane. This kind of method might have worked in the past, but now, the dragons had already beheaded them and used various methods to avoid it. Now, they had even begun to use these magic circles to explore the demon plane in reverse. In the office of these dragons, a map had begun to be slowly filled in and completed. The division of power was also gradually formed. Obviously, Kazwara was now desperately trying to find a new landing point in this plane. Most likely, his goal was to find his injured clone and plan the next invasion. But the harder he tried to act, the more flaws appeared in his plan. At this moment, it was completely used by Roddy and the dragons, becoming the source of the first step of the counterattack plan. And as for the clone in the virtual Tasso city of the half-plane, Taria, who was sitting at the dining table, slowly said to her parents in front of her, "I want to go out and take a look, can I?" End of this chapter. Chapter 1193. You can go out, but you must be accompanied by Mary. Your current condition isn't very good. We've already contacted the church. The bishop will prepare prayers and divine arts for you during the weekend. Perhaps your amnesia will be cured, Talia's mother, Anna Galen, said with a face full of concern. At the same time, she held Talia's somewhat cold hand. This action caused Talia to shiver instinctively, but she soon relaxed. She now realized that the two of them would not harm her. At least, they had guaranteed her food supply for the past few days. At the same time, the maid, Mary, had also taken care of her daily life even though she was weak. Even changing clothes and bathing was done with the help of the other party. Talia did not feel grateful for this. Her thoughts were cold, and she had even begun to think of ways to use their feelings for her to achieve more goals. "Mother," Anna's voice continued, "are you feeling better these days? Mary said that you can't even speak properly and you can't even recognize the words in books? Don't worry, if you can't recover your memory, we'll find a qualified teacher to teach you again. Talia, you're so smart, it won't be difficult for you to learn." "Sigh, it's my fault. I should have stopped you that day." Anna began to ramble on about the incident that caused Talia's amnesia. According to her, Talia was rebellious and mischievous by nature. When she was riding a carriage out of the city, she insisted on climbing to the top of the carriage to enjoy the scenery of the village outside. In the end, due to the sudden jolt of the wheels, she fell off the carriage. The severe impact on her head caused her amnesia, and she could not even remember words and language. Talia's mother talked about it almost every day, to the point that her ears had become calloused from hearing it. In front of her, her father, who had always been unsmiling, ate silently. Through these days, Talia had already learned that her father was a baron who had inherited a territory. However, the family usually lived in the city, as the focus of the family's brewing business was now located in the city. Thus, they no longer kept an eye on the farmers in the territory all day long. The members of the Chamber of Commerce would have a meeting every once in a while to decide on the future direction of the business. This also meant that the Galen family could only go to the manor outside the city for a month every year for holidays. Most of the time, it was managed by the housekeeper. "All right, rest early after dinner, Tyria. If you need anything, just tell Mary." Her taciturn father seemed to be a little cold to her. After dinner, he got up and went to the study. Tyria, on the other hand, wasn't in the mood to greet him. She looked a little dazed, her eyes wide open, as if they had never been focused before. Seeing her like this, her mother seemed to be very distressed. She pulled her and talked for a long time until she was tired. When the surroundings finally quietened down, Talia returned to her bedroom. Over the past few days, she had barely managed to learn the Bringan language and words, so when Mary caught up to her, she indicated that she was ready to go out. As a noble lady, it was natural for her to change her clothes and dress up meticulously before going out. Although Talia was not used to it, she had gradually adapted to the so-called rules. She had also unwittingly learned the normal way of using her fingers, and even her walking posture had been corrected by her mother to that of a noble. Talia instinctively remembered not to be too conspicuous in an unfamiliar environment, so she quickly blended into this unknown world, and until now it was difficult to see any flaws. Taking a deep breath, Talia changed into casual clothes and put on a cloak. She walked out of the door, turned the corner, and walked on the busiest street of the city for the first time. It was afternoon, and the bustling residents were walking back and forth. All kinds of topics filled her ears. Talia stood there and listened for a long time. Only when Mary asked her did she snap out of her trance and asked, "What is a mage?" This was because when people talked about mages, their tone was reverent and they used honorific. Talia's interest was immediately piqued. She instinctively wanted to control more power and a higher status. Mage? That means a very powerful person. Mary couldn't explain it clearly, and after describing it for a long time, Talia understood. She gestured and said, "How to be a mage?" This topic stunned Mary for a moment, then she hurriedly shook her head. "Don't think about it. The threshold to become a mage is too high, and I've never heard of a noble lady tormenting herself to become a mage. Miss, let's look for something else." But no matter how she persuaded, Talia seemed to have her eyes on the profession of mage. She even found a Dawson magic supply store, not far away through the discussions of the people around her. Ignoring Mary's obstruction, she directly pushed the door open and walked in. Then, she saw a red-haired female mage in front of the counter buying items and taking out gold coins to pay for them. 1 gold coin and 12 silver coins, here. Nephi's voice was very crisp. After she finished speaking, she turned her head to look at Talia, raising her eyebrows somewhat strangely, and then smiled politely. Talia originally had a wooden expression like a mask, but at this moment she knew that if she wanted to understand everything about mages, she would first have to start from the girl in front of her. So she controlled her muscles and forced herself to reveal an awkward smile, nodding slightly. But Nephi didn't seem to have any intention of saying anything more. She turned her head to take the materials she bought, brushed past Talia, and stepped out of the door without saying anything. Talia's gaze followed Nephi's back closely. She wanted to open her mouth to stop her, but the knowledge she had learned these days made her understand that it wasn't polite to do so, nor was it appropriate. So in the end, Talia resisted the impulse and turned to look at the old man in front of the counter. Is there anything you need? This Mississippi, I want to ask how to become a mage. Talia's straightforward question made the old man raise his eyebrows, then he smiled bitterly and shook his head. This I can't answer you casually. If you go down the wrong path because of my suggestion, you will definitely find trouble with me when the time comes. But the more he said so, the more Talia realized that she had actually touched upon something. Her heart was a little excited, and she wanted to continue asking, but Mary hurriedly stopped her. Miss, please don't ask any more, or else. Why? Talia was puzzled and asked, Why can't I become a mage? Mary stuttered a little. She seemed to know something, but it was obviously not easy to explain in front of outsiders, so Talia finally chose to give up for the time being. She brought her to the door and said, Can you tell me now? Miss, being a mage costs too much money. Look at that mage just now. He had to spend gold coins to buy such a small amount of things. If you want to be a mage, I'm afraid your family can't afford it. Chapter 1194. Gold Coins. Tyria was at a loss. After listening to Mary's explanation for a long time, she finally understood that everything here required money. The Galen family was only in the middle class of the entire city. Although they were well off, they were definitely not rich enough to afford their children to learn magic. For the nobles in the city, there were only 7 or 8 families in the surrounding territories who were qualified to learn magic. Moreover, this city had a high-ranked mage, which was why there was a magic tool shop. Otherwise, it would be impossible to see a mage like Naife. It took Tyria an entire day to understand this information. When she returned home under Mary's persuasion, she could no longer hold back her desire to explore the world of mages. In the following half a month, she began to study the language and knowledge with all her might, reading the books in her house day and night. But at this time, Tyria did not realize that the books in her house were obviously problematic. In other places in this world, books were mostly made of parchment, which were expensive and rare. However, the bookshelves in Baron Galen's house were filled with paper books. The contents ranged from language, history, art, family history, heraldry, and so on. 3 or 4 of them more or less mentioned mages, and one of them specifically talked about the magical aspects of plain magic. The more she understood, the more excited Tyria became. She had an instinctive desire for power, and from this, she knew that mages were the privileged class in this world. This strengthened her resolve to bury herself in books. As she read more history books, she finally had a general understanding of the world and the current era she was in, but soon, she also realized that her situation was not good. In this era, the fate of noble women was often left with no choice. In the end, they would become tools for marriage alliances. The greater nobles relied on marriage alliances to gain support or actual territory, while the lesser nobles fought for commercial interests. The Galen family's territory wasn't large, and the yearly taxes from the territory weren't even enough to cover the expenses of carriages and servants for a family living in the city. The real profit came from the brewery and the sale of wine. Tyria was 23 years old, and logically speaking, she should have been married long ago. If not for her unwillingness to agree to marriage all these years, she would have long been married to other noble children in the Chamber of Commerce. After Tyria's body had fully recovered, she had overheard her parents discussing her marriage in the dining room several times. The boy from a certain family was suitable, and the power of a certain family would be more beneficial to the Galen family in the future. These words made her realize that the love her parents had for her was simply a form of comfort. Everything was just to use her as a bargaining chip when needed. She did not understand the fate after marriage, but from Mary, she knew that the biggest function of a noble lady after marriage was to keep giving birth. She did not think that was a good thing. She began to search the streets for more clues, and coincidentally discovered that the famous high-grade mage Ethan in the city was openly recruiting apprentices. He was going to conduct an aptitude test through a ceremony to select suitable people to become his apprentices. Tyria realized that this was her chance. At the same time, she also understood that the so-called aptitude test was not only about talent, but also to allow her to grasp some basic knowledge of magic. In order to find and come into contact with these things, Tyria, who had no connections, finally chose to gamble. She took out all the savings she could find in her room, and even sold off some precious jewelry to gather 13 gold coins. She went to Dawson's magic supply store, hoping to buy a so-called magic teaching material. However, the white-haired shop owner, Dawson, obviously saw through her intentions. He shook his head and refused. Magic is never something that can be learned by self-study. Many people have lost their lives because of this. I think you're still a noble lady. Live your life well. She didn't reveal a pleading expression like most women. Instead, her brows were furrowed, and she even swept her gaze across old Dawson's neck. Evidently, some instincts that remained in her consciousness still made her lean towards using violence to solve problems. Before Dawson could say anything, Neffy pushed the door open and walked in. After seeing Tyria, she raised her eyebrows with a somewhat surprised expression on her face. She then nodded as a greeting. After seeing Dawson's expression, she asked, "Is there a problem?" She insisted on learning magic. She brought the gold coins to buy the teaching material. Dawson explained with a bitter smile. Neffy did not respond to him, but looked at her for a few seconds and said, "Why do you want to become a mage?" Tyria seemed to have already thought of an answer. She immediately said, "I don't want to be a bird in a cage." However, she did not know that her answer not only made Neffy's mouth twitch, but also made the invisible mastermind nervous. Neffy wanted to leave the demiplane and seek help, but she soon realized that doing so would only make things worse. After a few seconds of silence, she sighed and said, "You have many ways to change your fate. Why do you insist on this path?" Tyria's expression froze. She found that this was indeed a problem. It seemed that from the moment she heard about magic, her mind had an uncontrollable desire to learn magic. She was deeply convinced that she could learn it and learn it well. Seeing Tyria's hesitation, Neffy secretly let out a sigh of relief. This meant that the initiative of the conversation was back in her hand. Without waiting for Tyria to answer, she continued, "Learning magic isn't as simple as learning horsemanship or learning noble etiquette. If you want to master it, you have to get rid of all distractions. Among the nobles, those who can do this are usually the most intelligent elites in the family. Are you sure you're qualified?" Neffy said a lot in one breath, and at the end she warned, "If you can't do it, don't think too much. Learning magic is never a good thing. It's boring and painful." "I can do it." Tyria felt that she was not confident enough, but she quickly raised the money bag in her hand and said, "I've taken out all my gold coins just to ask for a book. If it really doesn't work," she seemed to have overcome a great difficulty and said in a low voice, "If it really doesn't work, then I'll give up." Neffy looked at the heavy money bag and turned to Dawson. "Do you still have the first part of elemental lectures?" Dawson knew what she meant. He shook his head with a bitter smile and went to get the book. Tyria realized that she had really found the way. She looked at Neffy for a few seconds and finally said, Thank you." Neffy's expression was a little strange when she was thanked, but she still kept a straight face and waved her hand. "You can buy that book for 6 gold coins, but you may not be able to understand everything in it. If you have any questions, you can ask me. Don't make wild guesses. By the way, this is a paid consultation. You can't answer my questions for free." Tyria did not bargain at all. She immediately gave a standard ladylike bow and showed a very sincere smile. Chapter 1195. Outside the half-plane, July quietly arrived. The golden sun shone after the rain, and the farmland outside the city was washed by the rain, like a palette of colors. Roddy was sitting on the balcony of the Pasha Magic Tower, leisurely eating lunch with Camilla. The dining table was not big, and the dishes were not very sumptuous, but it was a rare opportunity for the two to eat alone. After all, Naife was always clamoring to eat together, and Talia often consulted her recently. Naife had to spend most of her time in the half-plane, so naturally, she would not come out to disturb the two. Camilla was a little shy, but Roddy was enjoying the breeze, which was rare for him. In his memory, the high-end restaurants were often tens of hundreds of stories high, and the feeling of looking down from above was indeed pleasant. He took a sip of red wine and asked Camilla, who had her head lowered, "It's been so many days, are you still worried about Naife?" It's okay. She has indeed grown up." Camilla was actually shy, and the atmosphere was always a little ambiguous when they were alone. She took a breath and said, "In the past, she always had to ask for my opinion, but now Naife has a lot of ideas in her mind. She can make decisions on her own quickly. You can't even call her a child now. Girls from the kingdom of Karen are about to get married at this age." Roddy shook his head. After all, in his memory, girls of 16 or 17 years old were only in high school. He finished the main course on the plate, and leaned back in the chair to enjoy the scenery in the distance. Camilla asked, "By the way, you said you have something important to do today. What is it?" "The important thing is to have a quiet meal with you without anyone bothering you. Look at you, it's not good to always frown. Don't always be so nervous." Hearing this, Camilla's cheeks suddenly flushed. "I'm not nervous, I'm quite relaxed." Then she was held by Roddy, who did not dare to look up at her. He smiled and said, "Now that the kingdom is stabilizing, even if there is a rebellion, it won't be a problem. I also understand now that it's enough to be nervous during the war, and when it's time to relax, it'll be difficult for me to be so relaxed in the future." "You mean, the news of the plane portal?" "Yesterday, there was good news from Hollier. The Plane Portal Research Department under Marinsura's leadership had made a breakthrough. The portal in the laboratory had found an anchor point in the elemental plane, and after stabilizing the coordinates, it began to absorb energy from the elemental plane and successfully charged the crystals. Of course, this was just a breakthrough from 0 to 1. It did not mean that the problem of crystal energy had been solved. Right now, the energy consumed to maintain the teleportation portal was greater than the energy absorbed. When this situation was reversed, it could be said that the problem of crystal energy shortage had been alleviated. But now that they had grasped the solution, and from the reports of Marinsura and the others, they only needed to find the appropriate coordinates to achieve this goal. After all, this was something that the dragons and the entire world of magic were paying attention to. Almost all the top talents had invested their efforts in this area, and if they succeeded, they would definitely be rewarded handsomely in the future. Camilla said this because this news was equivalent to the dividing line between the two eras of the world of magic. Magic crystal energy had shown a prospect of being used 100 times more efficiently than magic crystal, and the energy from the elemental plane could more effectively share the risks that could be shielded by the anti-magic domain. In the short term, this was an advancement in magic technology, but in the long term, Camilla could confirm that this was definitely the true starting point of the plane counterattack. Roddy nodded and replied, "The guided missiles are almost done, and the samples will be tested here in the next few days. Also, I'm ready to use the floating space tower project. Are you going to make something like Lasman or—" "No, Huvla City is flying in this direction. When it arrives, we will find a suitable place near the city to start experimenting. Right now, there is enough cobalt ore to support the first phase of the project." At this point, Roddy stopped talking and shook his head. "Let's not talk about this. I'm actually thinking about another problem. I've been thinking about the issue of your freedom recently, and now I've come up with 2 ways to try and see if they can take you out of this area." Camilla raised her eyebrows slightly and looked at him with surprise. "Haven't you tried many methods?" "Later on, I suddenly realized that the root of this problem is the problem of authority." Rhodey pointed at his feet. "Khadgar, as the creator of the city, is equivalent to the maker of the rules. If the whole of Elson City is compared to a system, then the authority he has is the highest level of existence. Even you, as the Guardian, are 1 level lower than him." What Roddy was talking about was actually administrator authority. He compared Elson to a computer, and the highest level administrator was Khadgar. And the first method is to forcibly raise your authority to the same level as him, or to directly erase all traces of Khadgar. This sounded very simple and crude, but Camilla immediately realized that the risk was too great. "Are you planning to use Divine Realm Control to do it? But what if this causes the original magic circle of the city to collapse?" Roddy also had this worry. Deleting system files randomly would cause the system to collapse. Although the divine power definitely had the authority to erase all traces of Khadgar, it was still a question whether it could maintain the operation of the entire city's magic circle. The biggest problem was that neither he nor Camilla had the ability to restore or repair such a grand arcanist-level magic circle. Because the dragons did not understand the arcane, they also had no way. Even if they let Edith do it, it would also be difficult. She had fallen into a deep sleep earlier than Khadgar, and although she also had the title of Grand Arcanist, it was like 2 doctors with very different specialties. There was no way they could study each other's topics at will. So, Roddy slowly said, "The second plan is to expand the scope of the city, so that under the rules you can expand the area of activity. I want to try to connect the city of Hovela to the territory of Elson City and make it part of the city. So, if it succeeds, I can stay in the floating city and go anywhere?" Camilla immediately realized that this was very feasible. Although she would not obtain complete freedom, it was much better than looking at the city in front of her all day long. Roddy nodded. "But we can only try it when we reach the city of Hovela." Now, halfway through his words, he turned his head to the side because an elder of the dragons had appeared at the staircase. Prime Minister Roddy, Talia, just had an argument with her parents. Chapter 1196. Don't do such meaningless things anymore. Is magic so easy to learn? How much money does it take to become a mage? You have no idea at all. The veins on her father's forehead bulged, and he roared like a berserk lion. Anna gently hugged Tyria and whispered, all right, don't be stubborn. I know you're just curious. Curious? Curious that you can sell your jewelry to buy some magic book?" Merrick roared, "You really disappoint me. From now on, don't leave the house even half a step. Viscount Polly has a banquet the day after tomorrow. You can stay silent all the time, but don't mention magic again." After saying this, he turned around and left angrily. Tyria's face was numb. Anna looked at her and hurriedly said, "Just be obedient and don't think so much. Magic is too complicated, how can you understand it?" But Tyria nodded. "I can understand." "Nonsense again. Of course I can understand the words in the book, but can you release magic?" Without waiting for Tyria to answer, she pulled her daughter up and stuffed her into the bedroom. "I still have something to do, don't make father angry again. Be obedient." The door was closed. Tyria looked at the door in front of her, and her expression involuntarily became gloomy. Her magic book and the remaining gold coins were confiscated by her father. Obviously, learning magic was not something that could be considered at all in the Galen family. Faced with her furious father, Tyria had explained it to him, and even had the idea of directly confronting him, but she was very clear that she was no match for her strong father, even if she had just developed a concept of magic and was making rapid progress. It was still too early to apply it in actual combat. But if she continued to stay here, Tyria knew that there was no way out for her. The banquet the day after tomorrow was for her to have a simple meeting with Viscount Polly's son, and if nothing unexpected happened, they would set a marriage contract, and she would marry him. The conversation she overheard said that this would allow the Galen family to get more orders from Viscount Polly's southern territory. But the price was that Tyria would have to follow the Viscount's son to live in the faraway countryside in the south. There was no mage tower there, let alone a kind mage like Nephi to guide her. Tyria was unwilling to accept such an arrangement, but she was penniless now, and her magic books had been confiscated. What should she do? After sitting in the house for a while, Tyria suddenly stood up and watched as her mother, Anna, boarded the carriage and left. Not long after, her father also hurriedly left the house. In the end, she was unwilling to wait for her fate in the house. After confirming the position of the servant guarding her, she put on her cloak, pushed open the window and nimbly climbed out from the second floor along the eaves. Due to her strong body coordination, Tyria was far more agile than an ordinary noble girl. She didn't leave immediately, but instead entered her father's room and took away the gold coins and magic books that were confiscated from her today. After that, she went straight to Nephi's house. Tyria knocked on the door of Nephi's residence, and the latter invited her in with some surprise. "What's going on? Did someone bully you?" Nephi wasn't old, but at this moment, she seemed much more mature than Tyria. This was because she had always played the role of a powerful middle-ranked mage, and from all aspects, she revealed a strong and independent aura. "Lord Mage, I have some questions to ask you." "Speak, it's still the same as before." Nephi's paid consultation fee was not considered expensive. This was to allow Tyria to train her questioning skills, and also to prevent her from becoming a pushy person. However, Tyria did not ask about magic, but simply explained the current predicament she was facing. "So, Mage Nephi, I don't know why they want me to marry a specific person, and at the same time, they don't want me to come into contact with magic. Although it costs a lot of gold coins, I can definitely earn back that money in the future." These days, Tyria had already displayed extraordinary talent. Not only was she fast in learning magic, but her memory, reciting incantations, and even writing and carving magic arrays were all astonishing. Under this premise, as long as she had enough raw materials, she could make a lot of money by selling her own magic tools. However, when she explained, her father rudely interrupted her and said, "There's no point in learning this, it will only make you unable to get married." After listening to this, Nephi thought for a moment and said, "This question does not involve magic, so I won't charge you. However, what I'm going to say next only represents my own opinion. After listening to it, you can think about it yourself. How about it?" Tyria quickly nodded. Parents are born with a desire to control their children. Sometimes they want to control you not to achieve any goals, such as commercial benefits, or to raise their status, but more for psychological satisfaction. Seeing that you can control the fate of others, isn't it a kind of enjoyment? Look at the Lord Vesta, when he says that someone is sentenced to death, that person will immediately be dragged to the square to be hanged. This kind of fate that can decide the life and death of others is often fascinating. Nephi pointed at the air with her finger, and a ball of light condensed. "You want to become a mage, want to have a higher status, in fact, in essence, in your heart, you want to be free from control. After all, the more power you have, the harder it is for others to control you, isn't it? If you were a high-grade mage now, would your father still talk to you with that kind of attitude? I'm afraid that when he sees you become the Lord's guest, he will have to be careful when talking to you." Tyria nodded in agreement, then narrowed her eyes. "But I can't stop them now. I'm afraid this money is not enough for me to continue learning magic. The first thing to do as a mage is to think and make your own decisions. You can ask for advice and improve your assessment, but don't be gullible. This is my advice, Nephi said as he handed a notebook to Tyria. You are very talented, it would be a pity if you stopped training. I can only help you this much. The day after tomorrow is the day of the audit, make your own decision then. This meant that he wanted to send her away. Tyria took the notebook with some surprise and found that it was filled with some of Nephi's experiences. She immediately stood up and bowed to thank him. Believe in yourself and don't be a slave to anyone. Nephi smiled. I have a similar fate as you, so I know what you are facing. This sentence made Tyria deeply agree. She lowered her head and bowed again. I will remember this. End of this chapter. Chapter 1197. Phew, seeing that Tyria had left the street, Naife breathed a sigh of relief. When she saw the signal light next to her turn on, she packed up the things on the table, turned around, and walked into the house. She left the demiplane through a portal and came to the control room. Well done. Roddy had already arrived at the control room. He and Camilla laughed and praised Naife. The latter's mouth suddenly curled up, and her originally dignified and cold steps became unusually light. I've practiced many times. Naife had a proud expression on her face. However, Rhodey knew that she was still lacking when it came to her acting skills. Don't be too proud. Your previous words can only deceive Talia, who doesn't know anything. Anyone with a little bit of experience can see that you are just putting on an act. Naife immediately pouted, but Roddy laughed and said, It's not a bad thing to be lacking in acting skills. Sometimes you forget who you are when you act too well. This made Naife thoughtful, but Roddy immediately changed the topic. There's a good show later. Let's watch it first. On the monitor screen, Tyria was on her way back. At this time, a few dragons could be heard through the walkie-talkie that they were making the final confirmation of her position. The servants in the courtyard of the Garen family had changed their positions, so that Tyria could smoothly return to the house, without being discovered. Although she had made up her mind, she obviously had no intention of going against her parent. The first thing she did when she returned home was to take the gold coins and a book disguised as a magic book back to the original place in Merrick's room before her parents returned. Then she took Naife's notes and obediently returned to her room. The two dragons who played as her parents had actually been nearby for a long time. At this time, everyone was watching Tyria's decision. At this time, it seemed that the Demon Lord intended to hide and disguise herself, and had no intention of confronting her head-on. This decision made the actors heave a sigh of relief. In fact, they had already prepared for Tyria to kill her parent. After all, the Demon Lord was a person who would do anything to achieve his goal, and the relationship between parents was probably not binding at all. But now, it seemed that she did not seem to be that vicious. It was not that Tyria was gentle or cunning, but that she adapted very quickly to the rules of this world. When she was not strong enough and the deterrence of laws and regulations still existed, Tyria would not choose to act recklessly like a jungle animal. She began to read Naife's notes, and was pleasantly surprised to find some important ideas for meditation. That day, Tyria successfully meditated and used her spiritual power to absorb a small part of the elements in the demiplane to form her own magical power. Such progress was practically impossible for an ordinary human, but Tyria's soul was ultimately different from that of an ordinary person's. Her spiritual power far exceeded the norm, and she almost instantly stepped into the threshold of a magic apprentice. Her spiritual power was far beyond that of ordinary people, and she almost instantly stepped into the threshold of a sorcerer's apprentice. But because her magic level was not high, Tyria could not detect the magical waves in her surroundings, let alone observe the traces of elemental waves like Naife. To Roddy, the plan went very smoothly. That night, Tyria obediently told her parents that she would no longer study magic, and that she was willing to follow their arrangements to attend the dinner party the day after tomorrow. Behind the screen, Roddy and the rest understood that the hard work of more than a month was about to bear fruit, and that Tyria would also make the first major decision of her life, the day after tomorrow. That night, Roddy handed a note to Naifi, but he did not inform Krupus and the rest of Naifi's arrangements. He only emphasized that, no matter what happens, go according to plan. Everyone had long since trusted Roddy. After all, the whole plan was always under control, and even if it failed, he could destroy Tyria's body at any time. Under this premise, Krupus chose to trust Roddy unconditionally and did not ask any questions. The next day, the city of Hovela finally crossed the sea and arrived above Elson. Camilla originally imagined that the city of Hovela looked like a floating island, but she never thought that she would see a steel warship floating in the air. Actually, I should call it Hovela. Camilla, this will be the flagship of our Air Force in the future, or should I say the aerospace mothership. Roddy turned his head and looked at Camilla, who had her mouth slightly agape. He then looked at Naife, who was on the other side. Naife proudly added, "There is also a plane up there. It can take off from here and go anywhere. Then, with the magic cannons of Elson, won't it be able to take down any city? So now we don't need to worry about ordinary rebellions and wars." Roddy had to find a place to show off the advanced weapons that he had created through divine power and the concept of war in another world. It was not interesting to scare the country bumpkins on the other side of the sea, but to scare Camilla to the point that she could not close her mouth for a long time made him feel very good. After staring at her for a long time, Naifi next to him interrupted with some dissatisfaction. "Brother Roddy, why did it stop?" Oh, it's okay. It will come over soon." Turning his eyes to the system in front of him, Roddy coughed softly and began to control the direction of the Hovela subtly. At first, Roddy felt that this control panel was very human-like, because it could move forward, backward, left, right, up, and down through a virtual keyboard and controller. At the same time, the acceleration and deceleration were all adjustable pushrod. It was very much like the control mode of the game in his impression. But after a long time, he realized that the so-called aerospace mothership control interface was simply designed according to the concepts in his memory. In other words, in the current Earth-divided world, Roddy had explored areas outside of the original historical process, and the previous experience was no longer enough. He opened the mission system of Elson City, which he had not paid attention to for a long time. The automatically generated missions had been completed in the past 2 years, and Roddy did not actually carefully look at the rewards and unlocked new buildings. But at this time, when the Hovela reached the periphery of the defense circle, the system immediately gave a prompt. Abnormal target identified. Allow entry? He did not rush to click yes. Instead, he opened the control page of the city of Hovela on the other side. After searching for a while, he did not find anything like permission settings. But after thinking for a moment, he suddenly had an idea. He raised his hand and pulled the icon of the Hovela to the page of Elson City. Another dialog box suddenly appeared in front of him. Do you want to incorporate the city of Hovela into the territory of Elson City? Seeing this line of words, Roddy was a little nervous and clicked yes. The next moment, without needing his reminder, Camilla suddenly looked up at the Hovela that had already floated above. Her voice was a little shaky. I feel it. It has become a part of Elson City." Roddy breathed a sigh of relief. His expression relaxed. "Then, let's go and see." Before he finished speaking, Camilla opened her arms and fiercely threw herself into his arms. Chapter 1198. Previously, Roddy had discussed the feasibility of territorial authority, but Camilla really had no idea. But at that moment, Camilla clearly felt that the city of Hovela was included in her management and perception. Just like how she could know the conversations of people in any area of Elson City at any time, Camilla could now know every detail of this helicarrier like the back of her hand. The only difference was that, because the city of Havilah was not a magic city created by Khadgar, she could not control the various weapons or magic circles of the helicarrier like Elson could. However, if it was modified, it would not be difficult to achieve such a goal. The only thing she needed was Roddy's permission. And Camilla suddenly realized that she was too excited. At this time, she directly threw herself into Roddy's arms. Before she could react, Nephi had already turned her head. Ahem. Ahem. Camilla did not expect her daughter to see her gaffe. She immediately blushed and wanted to step back, but Roddy smiled and hugged her without letting go. Okay, let's go up and have a look. The Havilah had stopped directly above the magic tower. Roddy controlled it to descend, almost hovering about 10 meters away from them. Roddy held Camilla's waist and directly rose up with magic. The latter symbolically struggled at first, but in the end she obediently wrapped her arms around his waist and followed him to the helicarrier flying thousands of miles away. Nephi, who was behind, looked at this scene with her mouth open. She did not say anything but also flew up. When she stepped on the Havilah, Camilla still felt a little unreal. She looked around blankly, and then realized that Roddy had already controlled it to fly out of the city. Soon, the land under her feet was no longer the land of Elson City. She saw the farmland and rivers, and also saw the people below who were surprised and even frightened because they saw the UFO. This was the first time in a long time that she had truly left the original area of Elson City on the main plain. As the Havilah continued to rise, she saw the railway stretching into the distance and the caravans walking on the road. Camilla's eyes turned red and she was speechless. Roddy asked Nephi to accompany his mother on the deck, while he briefly inspected the soldiers and priests on the Hovira. The Havilah wasn't just an aircraft carrier. More importantly, it was powered by divine power and had an extremely high load limit. It completely broke the laws of physics and energy. Therefore, this time, it also carried the first batch of Tuk tribe priests from Distor city of Isika. They'll rest here for 3 days. After that, the green dragons will inspect them before letting them go. Alright, you guys go and arrange the supplies. I won't worry about this. Yes, Prime Minister. Roddy waved his hand and then invited Camilla and Nephi to come to the control room together. Although the entire Havilah was powered by divine power, after the transformation of the dragons, it no longer needed to rely on more than 10 priests to barely adjust it like before. Under Roddy's authorization, at least 2 people were now needed to carry out simple forward control of the Havilah. But at present, there were more than 20 soldiers sitting in the control room of the bridge. Because the helicarrier not only had to control the direction of the forward movement, but also had a series of functions such as communication positioning, investigation and search, spell lock attack, ship cannon lock attack, aircraft takeoff and landing scheduling, and so on. The central control area also had a magic screen that showed the image below. But because it was currently in the energy-saving state, the magic circle that needed crystals to drive was basically not turned on. Only a smooth metal plate could be seen. But even so, Camilla, who was standing in the middle of the bridge, still felt dazzled. She reached out and touched the back of the pilot's chair next to her. She wanted to say something but did not know what to say. Instead, Roddy asked, after staying in Elson City for a long time, how about taking this for a spin in the future? I haven't tried the highest flight altitude yet, but after more than 3,000 meters, ordinary people will feel suffocated and uncomfortable. It's no problem to fly casually below this height. By the way, it's best to avoid the black thunderclouds. Believe me, it's not a good feeling. You'll go deaf. Nephi looked at the joysticks and suddenly remembered that Roddy said that he wanted to modify the helicarrier. So she asked, what other modifications can be done to such a powerful flying city? Are we going to install the super long-range cannon on top of the magic tower? Weapons are one thing. In fact, the defense ability of the Hovala is still too weak. As soon as Roddy finished speaking, Camilla came back to her senses and asked in surprise, "Defense? If we have air supremacy, who else can attack here? I think unless the dragons attack in groups, I'm afraid no one can cause any damage here? Maybe it's thousands of flying demons." Roddy pointed outside. Fighting for air supremacy is not only dependent on our Falcon planes, but this helicarrier is also not just to provide an airport for takeoff and landing. Remember I said that I want to put the floating space tower project on the agenda? That's not to expand the area of the Hovala, but to make this place a veritable sky fortress. Camilla and Naife blinked. Although they were proficient in magic, they knew almost nothing about war, especially aerial warfare. It was even more difficult for them to understand what the sky fortress, described by Roddy, was. Roddy did not explain his plan too much. He just said, in other words, in the past, our way of war was either to attack the city or to stand on the city to defend. But in the future, the Hovala can exist as an offensive city. It can let us take the initiative in all wars, choose the scene and time of the battle, which is very important. Seeing Camilla nodding, he added, "This is also the most important fortress of the future kingdom of Karen. Camilla, I want you to be the captain of the Hovala. What do you think?" "Well, Captain?" Camilla was still thinking about the meaning of the sky fortress, and did not react for a while after hearing this. But soon she realized that Roddy wanted her to be the controller of this revolutionary weapon. She opened her mouth slightly and shook her head instinctively. This can't be done. I have never fought in a war. I also don't know how to control it. In fact, the most important thing to be a captain is to be able to execute all the commands of the headquarters. I will definitely entrust the task of modifying the Hovala to you, because from the perspective of war, the technology left by Khadgar is actually the most suitable existence, and you are the only one who has truly inherited his legacy. Camilla took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, then, let's start with modifying the city. End of this chapter. Chapter 1199. After circling around Hovala City for 30 kilometers, they returned to the vicinity of Elson City. Finally, they landed in an empty space outside the city. They circled the area and began planning to build a specialized factory for the modification and expansion of the Hovala. All of this would take some time, but Camilla took it very seriously. She realized that the floating space tower was not only for floating, but more importantly, it had to be designed by herself. This heavy responsibility was not something she could bear alone. It just so happened that Naife, as a top student who had studied in Lassiman, could help her mother in the construction of machinery and puppets. So, she was arranged by Roddy to be the technical leader of the modification factory. But Naife could not immediately get to work, because Turiya, who was in the demiplane, had made her decision. The demon monarch chose to run away on the day of the blind date banquet. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing a simple cloak. She ran straight to the magic tower and participated in the selection before the last place was up. She breathed heavily. Her terrible image surprised the others who participated in the test, but because Tyria's appearance was too gorgeous, no one laughed at her in the end, and they all waited silently. There were many steps in the test for the high-order mage Ethan. Many of the test-takers obviously encountered difficulties and were eliminated. They walked out dejectedly. Although Tyria had a good mental fortitude, she was obviously nervous. She sat in the waiting room, constantly flipping through the notebook that Naife gave her to relieve her anxiety. But as she flipped through the pages, she suddenly realized that some of the sentences were very wrong. According to the Bringan language that she had learned, there were even a lot of grammatical errors and grammatical errors. If it was written by an ordinary person, Tyria would not be suspicious. But for a knowledgeable mage like Naifi to write like this, she found it very strange. Her keen intuition told her that Naifi seemed to have done it on purpose, but no matter how she thought about it, she could not see any other meaning behind it. Not long after, she began the so-called aptitude test. Unsurprisingly, Tyria passed the test without a hitch. Because she performed the Magus hand perfectly on the spot, her talent was praised by Ethan. Very good. You are the student with the most potential I have ever seen. If you're willing to stay, I'll waive all your tuition fees and materials. You can follow Esther and study in my main lab. With that, Wizard Ethan stroked his beard and nodded in satisfaction. But at this moment, the carriage from the Galen family stopped in front of the magic tower. Merrick and Anna came to look for Talia with pale faces, but they didn't dare to act rashly at the entrance. After all, this was the territory of a high-ranked mage, and even the city lord had to be cautious. Wizard Ethan, who had received the news, personally met with them. After learning that Talia had run away on her own, he merely raised his eyebrows and expressed that Talia was a good seedling that he valued. After hearing these words, Merrick seemed to understand that some facts could no longer be changed. He looked at Talia, who was standing at the side, and did not fly into a rage like before. Instead, he sighed and expressed that it was an honor for the Galen family before leaving with Anna. At this moment, Tyria felt incomparably refreshed. She looked at her father's angry but helpless back, her hands tightly clenched together. Because she knew that from now on, she was completely free from her parents' interference in her destiny. The joy gradually grew. After Talia confirmed her dormitory, the first thing she did was to take her notebook and her remaining pocket money to look for Nephi before she started her magic studies. She wanted to inform Nephi that she had passed the review. At this time, Talia was affected by the environment. After receiving a favor, she had already begun to think of ways to repay the favor. After successfully knocking on Nephi's door, Talia raised her hand and handed over the gift she had bought along the way. She had used her remaining pocket money to buy a snack. Although it was not expensive, Talia did not have much money left. This was a token of her appreciation. For me. Nephi's eyebrows were raised high, and then she beamed with joy. Thank you. She invited Talia into the room, and the latter was also in a good mood. However, she immediately noticed that Nephi did not seem to be in a good state. There were dark circles under her eyes and her hair was a little messy. Did I disturb your rest? No. It's just that I've been sleeping late recently. I still don't want to sleep during the day. Hearing this, Talia did not ask any more questions. After the two talked for a while about the review, Talia took out the notebook and suddenly asked, "By the way, there are some words in this notebook that I don't quite understand. Some of them seem to have grammatical problems. Is it a typo?" Or, halfway through her sentence, she noticed that Nephi's expression had changed. Her eyes seemed to have suddenly lost focus, as if she had been hit by a mental spell. But very quickly, her expression became nervous. She stared at Talia, breathing rapidly. She quickly took out a piece of paper from her pocket and stuffed it into Talia's hand. At the same time, she said in a very low voice, "Go back and read it, At this moment, Talia was indeed a little confused by Nephi's behavior. But after a long period of interaction with Nephi, she knew that Nephi would not harm her. So she raised her hand and took the piece of paper. What? But before she could ask, she saw Nephi's head droop. She leaned to the side as if she was extremely sleepy. Talia quickly reached out to support her, but Nephi suddenly woke up and sat up abruptly. My head was a little dizzy just now. Maybe it's because I stayed up for too long," she explained in a low voice. Talia clutched the piece of paper tightly in her hand. Her mind was racing, but in the end, she did not ask for the notebook. Seeing that Nephi was not in a good state, Talia quickly took her leave. But before she left, Nephi did not ask for the notebook. Instead, she said that she had already given it to Talia and did not need to return it. She returned to the dormitory in the magic tower with a heavy heart. Only then did she take out the piece of paper and take a look. There were no words on it, only a string of numbers. Talia had a high IQ and strong mental strength. But when faced with such a string of numbers, she could not understand it even after thinking for the whole night. At the same time, she could not figure out why Nephi was in such a state. Her intuition told her that something was definitely wrong. But even when Talia started working with Ethan in the laboratory the next day, she still had no clue. This situation continued until the fourth day. When Talia listened to Ethan talk about the ancient, encrypted manuscripts, she suddenly realized that the string of numbers might be an encrypted text. End of this chapter. Chapter 1200. After finishing her day's work, Talia returned to her dormitory without even eating. She quickly took out the notebook that Nephi had given her, and immediately tried to decipher it according to the string of numbers. Soon she discovered that the 3 numbers in each paragraph represented page, line, and word respectively. From this, Talia was able to decipher the contents of the note. At this point, she finally understood why she felt that there were so many clerical errors in the note. It was because these seemingly illogical and uncommon words, after being deciphered, actually formed new sentences after being dismantled. The world is illusory. Someone wants to control you to escape. She silently read this sentence, her brows tightly knitted together. Talia was at a loss at this moment. If Nephi was warning her about something else, she could accept it. But the sentence, "the world is illusory," was it literal or a metaphor? She put the note away and remembered that she hadn't eaten today. With a belly full of doubts, she walked towards the canteen inside the magic tower. Unlike usual, Talia involuntarily began to observe her surroundings today, as well as the other members inside the magic tower. Everything seemed normal, and the content of their conversation was also related to magic. Talia listened for a long time, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. She had finished her meal in her heart. But that night she didn't sleep well. The next day, Talia began her work in the laboratory as usual. However, Talia inadvertently discovered that several people in the lower floors of the magic tower seemed to be doing repetitive work. The floor that they had just wiped would be wiped again when she passed by. She slightly narrowed her eyes, but didn't step forward to ask anything. Instead, she went on with her life as usual. Every morning after waking up, Talia maintained her usual habit of busying herself inside the magic tower. However, at night, she would often stand in front of the magic tower's window for a long time. At the same time, these days, she would take advantage of the short break to wander around the square market, looking around as if she was interested in everything. Just like that, time passed, and after another half a month, Talia never smiled again. When the rest day arrived, Tyria put on her gray mage robe and went straight to the market with her notebook in hand. She knocked on Nephi's door. The latter opened the door with the same attitude as the last time he met Tyria. After greeting her, he asked curiously, "You don't seem to be in a good mood. Did something happen to you?" Let's talk inside." Talia's posture was unnatural. She did not smile. Nephi asked her to come in and sit down, but before she could say anything, Talia took out the piece of paper with the number written on it. "Do you remember this? What is this?" Nephi had a strange look on his face. He took a few glances at it and frowned. "Numbers? What do you mean?" Talia stared at her face, her hands wringing together nervously under her robe. Seeing that Nephi didn't seem to know anything, she seemed to confirm something in her mind. She suddenly said, "You gave this to me." When did I give it to you?" Nephi was stunned. Then, she asked, "These words don't seem to be written by me. Also, what do these numbers mean? Could it be that I remembered wrongly? However, Talia slowly got up and pointed out the window. There will be a carriage passing by soon. The driver is wearing yellow clothes and a straw hat. Huh! Naifei turned her head and looked out the window. There really was a carriage slowly passing by as she said. The peasant woman over there talks about her husband falling into the ditch every day. After so many days, what she says has hardly changed. Similarly, although some of the people in the magic tower are doing things, there are also some who are sitting and repeating the same things. Some cycle every 2 days, some cycle every 3 days. Talia narrowed her eyes. I feel that there are actually many people in this world who are fake. Only a few are existences with thoughts. I now suspect that someone deliberately pushed me into this magic tower. There must be some strange content in the things I learn. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a deliberate arrangement. How can that be? Naifei still couldn't believe it. In the end, Talia said loudly, "You must know something. Otherwise, you wouldn't use such a method to tell me that there must be something wrong with this world. You also have a problem, but you're the only one who might wake up. Answer me, Naifei. What the hell is going on?" As Talia spoke, she suddenly realized that something was wrong. She suddenly looked out of the window, and found that the originally bustling street had suddenly become empty. This strange scene instantly made Talia's scalp tingle. She saw that the carriage that had just passed by was now swaying on the ground. Even the horse and driver had disappeared. Turning her gaze back, Naifei also stared outside with her eyes wide open. Before she could say anything, a magic circle in the house quickly sounded. Talia knew that this was a warning. She immediately prepared for battle. In the end, before the door could open, she felt a buzz in her brain and her whole body began to uncontrollably lean to the side. Naifei seemed to have encountered the same thing. Her eyes lost focus as she leaned against the back of the chair behind her. In the next moment, she once again turned into the strange appearance that Talia had seen before. She desperately rushed over and grabbed Naifei, her mouth almost touching her ear. She hurriedly said, "Don't forget. Never forget. They will erase your memory. Don't be controlled. Don't." Before she could finish her words, the door was slammed open. Sawdust splashed onto Talia's face. She saw many tall figures rushing into the house. She tried her best to focus her gaze on the one in the lead, but another violent mental attack assaulted her. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted completely. The plan is terminated. Krupus's expression was not very good, but he quickly thought of something and asked Naifei, who was still supporting Talia, "Don't tell me, this is also part of the plan?" Crystal Dragon Lord remembered what Roddy had said. He believed that Naifei's small actions were intentional, so he quickly calmed down from his previous anxiety. "If we do this, I'm afraid that she will always have doubts in her heart, right? Then the second stage." Krupus suddenly paused because he thought of a certain possibility. Looking up to the other side, Roddy and Camilla had already walked in from the portal behind. Looking down at the unconscious Talia, he pulled Naifei up. "Well done." Then Roddy said to Crystal Dragon Lord, "In order to make the plan less flawed, I used this arrangement. Now that everything is going well, I announce that the first stage has been successfully completed." However, the dragons in the house were all dumbfounded. They all thought that the plan had failed, and their faces were full of anxiety. Krupus smiled bitterly and touched his beard, but he shook his head and said, "I was wondering why you deliberately emphasized it to me before. I should have thought of this scene." After a pause, he asked with some desire to continue, "Speaking of which, how did you come up with this idea?" Chapter 1201. If Roddy did not mention a word about it and kept Krupus in the dark from beginning to end, the feudal lord would indeed be unhappy. After all, it meant that Roddy did not trust the dragon's arrangements. But the fact was that Roddy had already informed him in advance and hinted several times that he had other actions. Therefore, Krupus only needed to ponder for a moment to understand why Roddy did this. In the end, it was related to Krupus's ability to control illusions. Actually, it's an idea that came to me after I talked about illusion control with you, feudal lord. Roddy gave a detailed explanation and used the concepts that he understood to explain how the illusion worked. From his point of view, the people and things in the entire city were similar to a program code, and they were all existences displayed by Krupus's thoughts. In other words, Krupus was a processor in charge of supporting the operation of these programs in the illusion. But his processing ability was limited, so in order to be able to save resources, many of the NPCs could only continuously repeat the same things. And the most important thing was that Krupus could not always grasp all the details of the illusion. For example, when Talia saw that the coachman always passed by on a fixed route, when Krupus suspected that she was suspicious, even if the coachman's route did not change, the other NPCs in the vicinity would inevitably be affected by his thoughts. It was very likely to achieve the effect of online bug fixing. For an illusion of such a large scale, it was not something that could be prevented by pretending not to know. Therefore, Roddy deliberately created this information gap as a means of shielding himself from the processor's interference. Krupus had never touched a computer before, but the concepts that Roddy explained were not far off. Thinking about the bugs that Talia discovered, he stroked his beard and asked, "So, this is also considered a simulation of actual combat?" Thinking that he actually let a demon lord test the illusion, Krupus inexplicably shuddered. This opportunity did not come easily. Taking advantage of the fact that she hasn't accumulated more experience, this kind of drill is actually more effective. Roddy nodded. After all, only the enemy can find the weakness in the defensive line. Many of the things she mentioned were things that I didn't think would be a problem. I didn't expect it. Krupus sighed and then asked, "Then, when will the second stage begin?" "Once the memory erasure is over, it can be carried out directly. I'll have to trouble you then, my lord." This is actually not a problem, but this illusion. Wait, I suddenly thought of something. As Krupus spoke, he suddenly froze. It was obvious that he had realized something. With his silence, the illusion around him faintly wavered for a moment before stabilizing. Roddy could not tell what the difference was. He activated the Witcher's vision and found that the dim glow on the surface of the illusion seemed to be more restrained. "I see," Krupus narrowed his eyes, but did not explain anything because the construction of the illusion was not something that Roddy and the others could understand. After that, the Lord arranged for the other dragons to clean up the scene, and at the same time, said that he would go back and carefully think about the construction of the new illusion. And after carrying the unconscious Tyria away, the surrounding illusion also began to disappear along with the Lord's incantation. Camilla watched all this from the side, as if she had not understood it yet. She asked, "After discovering the existence of the illusion, will she not be fooled again? What you said is actually our ultimate goal. But this still requires some means to achieve." So you made her doubt, not only about the reality of the illusion, but Camilla finally realized the core of the whole plan. Roddy nodded. When he turned around, the entire half-plane had become a vast expanse of white. Tasso City, where Tyria had been busy and struggling for almost 2 months, had disappeared just like that. The tens of thousands of people had also disappeared without a trace. Such a contrast really made Roddy sigh with emotion. He remembered that there was once a monk on Earth who had done performance art. Using various natural minerals and materials, they painstakingly painted a beautiful, complicated, and huge Thanka on a table. After spending several weeks and nights to finish the painting, they could only keep it for less than a quarter of an hour before they were quickly swept away and destroyed. Now, Roddy felt that everything was like a dream. Was the existence of himself and this world an illusion in the hands of the gods, which could be erased with a wave of their hands? What are you thinking about? Hearing the voice, Roddy came back to his senses. He took Naifei and Camilla out of the half-plane and returned to the control room. I'm just thinking, if Lord Krupus really creates an illusion without any loopholes, will it be considered as creating a world? Naifei's interest was immediately aroused. I remember the famous saying of the sorcerer of the school of prophecy. As long as you can grasp all the cause and effect and details, you can predict the future with 100% certainty. In other words, as long as you understand the whole world, you can create a flawless illusion? Roddy could not help laughing. Isn't this the uncertainty principle? What principle? Camilla was stunned. It was also the first time that Naifei had heard of this concept, but Roddy waved his hand. It's a theory that I haven't figured out myself. I've only heard people talk about it. The general idea is that if you know the exact present, you can predict the future. But this is not a conclusion, it's a premise. In fact, it's impossible for us to know the exact present, at least for now. Roddy was not a physicist. The concept of quantum mechanics basically came from the popular science books. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle was originally used by the physicist Heisenberg to explain the uncertain state of particles, but the explanation in this aspect had even risen to the level of philosophy. He was quite sure about the last sentence, but when he thought of the world that Calcius had shown him, Roddy then remembered that the power of a real God was obviously beyond the understanding of the laws of physics that humans on Earth understood. Well, the second phase will probably start in 3 days. I still need to discuss with you about the construction of the factory on the Hovela. Naifei, about the structure of the crane's mechanical arm. He chatted with the mother and daughter as he left the control room. On the other side, Tyria, who was lying on the bed, had already fallen into a deep sleep. The 2 green dragons confirmed her physical and mental condition. The crystal dragons next to her were discussing the details of how Tyria saw through the illusion in a low voice. Soon, Krupus came over and began to cast the memory erase spell. But this time, Tyria's memory was not completely erased. Chapter 1202. Prepare for the 71st connection. All project teams report the status. Number 1 Magical Circle Inspection completed. Number 2 Magical Circle Inspection completed. Number 3 Recording time, August 27th. Crystal status confirmed, 3rd inspection completed. A total of 477 standard charging crystals. Core Magical Circle node confirmed for the 2nd time. Inspection completed. The node is in good condition without any damage. Adjust the coordinates and start the 1-minute countdown. Begin. The magical circles on the nodes were activated in sequence. With a buzzing sound, the huge plane teleportation portal that covered an area of more than 300 square meters began to be infused with crystal energy. Wearing a light purple robe, Merlinsera's hair was tied up. She held a stack of forms in her hands and quickly checked the scale on the coordinate adjusting device in front of her. Although the dragons around her had already checked it several times, she was still a little nervous. 30 seconds to the countdown. Unrelated personnel, leave immediately. 20 seconds to the countdown. Defense Magical Circle, activate. Air Pressure Sealing Magical Circle, activate. Victor, who was standing in the distance, waved for Kardashian to return to the cover outside the magical circle. Merlinsera also retreated to the predetermined position when the countdown reached 10 seconds. Wave Concealment Magical Circle, activate. The intense use of energy caused the temperature in the room to rise rapidly. The air above the magical circle began to distort. The air was heated and disturbed by magic, forming a small windstorm, causing Merlinsera's robe to flutter loudly. 3 seconds to the countdown. 2 seconds, 1 second. Activate. Light filled the room, and in an instant, Merlin Sarah could feel her eardrums sucking in rapidly. At the same time, a ball of light suddenly appeared above the magic circle, and in 3 seconds, it expanded into a stable spherical teleportation door. Stable node. Reinforcement magical circle, activate. The spherical teleportation portal was pulled open by an invisible force and stabilized on a dozen metal protrusions on the ground. Then, the elders of the Black Dragon Hurlo rushed up from both sides with 2 heavy door frames that were 7 to 8 meters tall. With a click, they connected to both sides of the teleportation portal. Due to the chaotic elemental fluctuations, they did not dare to use magic to do such a thing. They could only rely on their physical strength to build the portal. As the 2 door frames connected smoothly, the entire portal was pulled into a regular rectangle and quickly stabilized. An icy blue light entered his eyes, and the aura from the elemental plane immediately gushed out from the portal. The air that was scorching hot just a moment ago immediately became cold, and even white mist appeared. The coordinates are stable. Reduce the energy output of the crystals to a safe range. Enter the detector. An improved spider puppet entered the planar portal. It was obviously an improved version of Naifei's eavesdropping puppet. Its size was 3 to 4 times larger, but its movement speed was extremely fast. The signal transmission is stable. Executing probe command. Elemental wave detection complete. No elemental creatures exceeding the standard in the vicinity. Safe confirmed. Energy assessment begins. Upon hearing this, all the dragons, including Lord Victor, held their breath. Their gazes all fell on Merlin Sarah, who lowered her head to read the scale used to display the detection value. This oppressive silence lasted for nearly half a minute. Merlin Sarah had been staring at the scale with a frown. Then, she raised her eyebrows and shouted, "The peak value has reached 17. The lowest value has stabilized at 12. It has exceeded the expected standard value." Phew, Victor heaved a sigh of relief, but he did not let his guard down. He raised his hand and began to personally control the energy absorption matrix, absorbing the endless elemental energy from the elemental plane gate into the pre-processing carrier. Then, with the help of more than 10 elders, the energy finally passed through the transmission matrix that was more than 70 meters long and was injected into the improved charging crystal that had been prepared in advance. Charging successful. Energy loss is within 14%. Target achieved. Upon hearing the words coming from the other side, all the dragons and mages around the magic circle cheered. Although they had seen their fair share of ups and downs, in the face of such results, even Lord Victor could not help but smile from ear to ear. He could not help but say, "We did it! We did it!" Marinthra looked up at the blue teleportation gate and felt that it was unreal. However, she heard footsteps beside her and saw Kardashian jogging over. Kardashian opened her arms and hugged her tightly. "Ha ha ha ha, we did it!" Although Merlin Sarah knew this lady's temper, she still felt a little overwhelmed. However, today was indeed a memorable day, because the entire Plane Matrix Research Department had finally achieved the goal of energy output being greater than the energy consumption of the Matrix after days and nights of hard work. It was also from this moment onward that the door of eternal energy was slowly opened to the kingdom of Karen. It was foreseeable that in the future, not only would everything in the human world undergo a huge change, but the internal structure of the dragons would also be affected and undergo an unprecedented transformation. We still have to wait until the end of the first cycle to confirm. Aya, I know you're cautious, but the most important thing now is to celebrate. I've asked them to prepare a celebratory feast. Let's not go home until we're drunk tonight. Kardashian hugged her tightly again, then shouted at Iskar and the others who had come to help at the last minute to celebrate. The guided missiles developed by the Strategic Arms Research Department were completed, but the battle that happened in Esker made them realize the impact of the anti-magic domain on crystal weapons. In order to prevent the ultimate weapons that they had painstakingly researched from becoming useless, assisting in the development of energy in the other plane had become a joint responsibility of the two departments. However, from today onward, their assistance was considered to have come to an end. How to adapt the improved, elemental plane version energy-filled crystals to make guided missiles would become the next new topic of the Strategic Arms Research Department. Marinsura looked at Lord Victor, who was not far away. The latter and the other elders of the dragons were gathered together to discuss the next step of adjusting the magic circle. In fact, most of the credit for the successful opening of the portal this time was due to this lord. After all, his attainments in the field of ice element magic were still beyond Marinsura's reach. This lord obviously noticed her gaze, so he specially came over to congratulate the minister on the success and expressed that the Frost Dragon race wanted to carry out exploration of the elemental plane. He hoped that Marinsura could help with this goal. No problem, Lord Victor. Marinsura was stunned for a moment before she agreed. However, her behavior was neither servile nor overbearing, completely unlike most of the other human mages who were humble. Victor was indeed very happy at this moment, so he gave a few words of encouragement before turning around and leaving. Marinsura, on the other hand, looked at the figures of the dragons in front of her with mixed feelings. Before facing them, Marinsura had countless thoughts in her mind, but after working together with her enemies, and striving for the same goal and achieving results, the inextinguishable anger in her heart was really dissipating. Chapter 1203. Her hatred was like a nameless fire. When her relatives and friends were killed in the pursuit of the dragons, Marinsura swore to avenge them. Her desire for revenge had never been extinguished. Now, her anger towards the dragons had dissipated, not because she had given up on the idea of revenge, but because she had finally figured out who she should be seeking revenge against. When Roddy said that Kezevra was the real murderer, Marinsura thought that he was just trying to change the topic. However, when she had a large group of dragons working for her, it was much easier to get the information she wanted. Now, she had figured out many details that she had never known before, and her opinion of the dragons had changed again and again. She even met Lord Kyo, whom she wanted to kill the most, in the canteen. However, when Marinsura found out that some of the node technologies in the elemental plane portal required Kyo's research papers as technical support, she felt an indescribable mix of emotions. She went to look up Kyo's research papers and found that he had published more than 50 of them, and more than 20 of them were highly cited and highly rated. It could even be said that Kyo had single-handedly raised the level of understanding of the fire element among all the mages in the kingdom of Karen by using this method of knowledge sharing. Marinsura didn't understand why he did this at first, until she talked to Iskar about Kyo, and the honorary elder finally gave her the answer. He is atoning for his sins. So, Marinsura stopped thinking about those trivial things and focused on her current work. As she worked, she gradually realized the changes in the dragons. In her impression, the dragons, who were arrogant and thought that all other races were trash, had not only gathered together, but had also taken the initiative to study in the magic tower in the past. The dragons had been isolated from each other and rarely met each other. When they did meet, they didn't communicate much, and those who didn't get along with each other would even fight. But in the magic tower, they displayed an unprecedented order. The competition and conflicts between them still existed, but in a different form. For example, the number of papers published and the football matches in the demiplane. However, ever since the dragons were willing to share their knowledge on magic, the standard of magic in the kingdom of Karen had skyrocketed. The effect was especially obvious now. The high-ranking mages who lived far away from Holyar did not hesitate to spend a huge sum of money to come here to improve their magic. Some of them lost their composure on the spot after reading the high-ranking thesis. Some even broke down on the spot, because they realized that all their years of magic learning had basically gone to waste. For most mediocre mages, taking detours for their entire lives was a common sight. Coming to Holyar City to study seemed to have become the only way for mages. Marinsula was deeply moved by these changes, but when she raised her head, she knew that she was about to enter the next stage of the mission. After ensuring that the transmission was stable and the surroundings were safe, Marinsula couldn't help but partake in the celebration banquet that night. She couldn't remember exactly how much she drank, but when she woke up the next morning, she received a letter from Roddy and another document sealed by a red magic circle. Marinsula saw Roddy's congratulatory words and muttered in a low voice, "He doesn't know how to say it." But when she opened the seal and read the two documents, her expression suddenly turned serious. 30 kilometers outside of Elson City, at the edge of a small riverside village called Berg, stood a small magician tower. This was the residence of the intermediate magician Carlton. Because he was a magician, the nearby villagers called this dilapidated tower, Magician Tower. Carlton's life used to be quite comfortable, but in the past 2 years, it had been getting worse day by day. Logically speaking, since Elson City and Holyar City had greatly improved the standard of magic in this world, the income of the related professions should have greatly increased as well. However, the truth was exactly the opposite. The revolution in magic and technology had brought about almost subversive changes, and those who were relatively conservative or had no chance to keep up with the times were rapidly being eliminated. The magicians in the outlying areas might still be able to maintain their livelihood by relying on the lack of information and transportation, but Carlton, a magician who could not keep up with the technological changes, immediately became a defective product, abandoned by the industry chain. The profits of the scrolls and tools he made were getting lower and lower. He wanted to improve and increase his profits, but found that his ideas could not keep up with the times, and his competitiveness was getting worse and worse. Thus, he fell into a vicious cycle. Of course, he also wanted to improve, but the conditions did not allow it. When he wanted to go to Holyar City, he found that he could not even afford to stay in the hotel there. Putting down the latest issue of Callan Times, Carlton sighed softly. He was wondering if he should find another way out, or just take out all his money and gamble. Suddenly, the scenery outside the window suddenly darkened, interrupting his train of thought. Turning his head, Carlton realized that it was not a dark cloud. He was shocked, and immediately felt that something big had happened. He hurriedly ran down the magic tower, and as soon as he opened the door, he saw a group of figures floating down from the hovel. "Magician Carlton? I am Carlton, Prime Minister. Hello, hello." Anyone who read the newspapers would not mistake Roddy's appearance. At the same time, Carlton also recognized the Crystal Dragon Lord, Krupus. He was momentarily at a loss for words. After bowing repeatedly, he did not know what to say. No matter how he looked at it, his backwater was not a place the other party would come to. "It's like this, Magician Carlton. I have a mission that I need your help with. I want to use your wizard tower for about 3 months. As a reward, I will give you 30,000 dollars as compensation. At the same time, you will also have a chance to study in Holyar City. Of course, I will not force you. If you refuse—" "No, no, no, Prime Minister, I agree. Carlton did not even think about bargaining, and agreed on the spot. The things in his wizard tower were not worth much, and now he knew very well that the Prime Minister's promise of a chance to study in Holyar City was priceless to a wizard. Roddy did not seem surprised by his reaction. He turned back to look at Krupus, and the two nodded in tacit understanding. After that, an attendant brought Carlton to sign the contract. The money was paid on the spot, and the signature was effective. Furthermore, Roddy had even prepared a train ticket for him to go straight to Hollier City. Carlton immediately brought his servants and left in high spirits. Before he left, he turned back to look, and only then did he realize that a large light had enveloped the entire village. The villagers were called out by the soldiers one by one, and everyone's faces were filled with joy. He did not understand what was going on. Thinking of the contents of the contract, Carlton did not discuss it. He was now focused on going to Hollier City to meet the top wizard. As for Roddy, he did not care even if the Prime Minister tore down the tower. End of this chapter. Chapter 1204. 3 years ago, intermediate mages were not characters that could be easily dismissed. Mages who could reach the level of intermediate usually had the backing of nobles. How could it be like now, where money and resources could be easily taken care of? Roddy had now experienced the benefits of centralization of power. His impression of demolishing land to build high-rise buildings was probably no better than this. He turned to look at the nearby Berg village. The villagers were being gathered by the soldiers of the Hovela. Looking at their trembling faces, Roddy could understand their feelings. Most ordinary farmers would be scared to death when they saw a giant airship hovering over their heads for no reason. Everyone, we need to do a head count, and we will not harm you in any way. On the contrary, we will give you compensation and enough food. You don't have to worry, there were mages explaining to them. Roddy and Krupus did not interfere. The two of them walked up to the simple magic tower and took a look at the things that Mage Carlton had left behind. To be honest, the things in the lab looked like family heirlooms. If they were used for testing or spell research, it was no wonder that he was stuck at the level of intermediate. If he continued to work hard, it would be difficult for him to advance in his lifetime. This idea, to be honest, is a little crazy, but it's obviously more feasible. Krupus reached out to touch the badly worn tables and chairs. I just don't know if the Plain Magic Circle Research Department can keep up with the progress. For now, there shouldn't be a problem. Roddy walked to the window on the 4th floor of the tower. There was no glass here. The so-called window was a hole dug out. The villagers not far away should have already accepted the conditions. They began to walk to the bottom of the Hovela and were transported up by magic. They looked back at the village reluctantly. It was almost time to harvest the fields, which meant everything to the farmers. However, when they boarded the Hovela, they saw mountains of supplies in the cabin and quickly calmed down. After all, Prime Minister Roddy came here personally, and he would not harm the villagers of a nameless village. Don't leave the dogs and livestock behind. Take them all. The mage on the other side shouted, and the soldiers began to hurriedly pull the livestock up one by one. For a moment there was chaos, and it was very lively. Krupus raised his eyebrows. After thinking for a moment, he chanted a spell in a low voice. After an invisible wave spread out, the livestock obediently fainted. This way, it would be much easier for the soldiers to move them. All right, let's begin the next step. Roddy saw that all the people and animals had boarded the Hovela, so he let the mages proceed with the next step of the plan. They moved more than 10 nodes of the magic circle and surrounded the village. As the coordinates were confirmed, the magic circle was activated, and a light screen suddenly shone into the sky. Wizard Clayton, who had already walked far away, turned his head back and saw that the entire village had been covered by this light veil. Following that, the houses and farmlands gradually disappeared from sight. He wasn't in the mood to go back and take a look, because the agreement he had just signed was related to this aspect. Although he was extremely curious about what his wizard tower would become, Wizard Clayton still complied with the agreement. He boarded the carriage to the train station and never looked back. So, He didn't know that a village, exactly like Berg Village, had appeared in the half-plane of the Pasha Magic Tower 3 days later. This time, everything was no longer an illusion. The wheat fields were real, the rivers were real, the houses were real, the chickens and ducks running around, and the watchdogs were also real. Similarly, the villagers who slowly woke up in their houses in the early morning did not realize that they had entered the half-plane because their memories of the past 3 days had been erased. One by one, they continued with their daily lives. At the same time, in the wizard tower that stood at the edge of Berg Village, an apprentice woke up. Talia opened her eyes and looked at the simple ceiling for a few seconds. Then, she suddenly sat up. She felt that there was a lot of information in her head, but when she thought about it carefully, it was all a blur. She couldn't remember the specific things at all. It was like the feeling after waking up from a dream. At first, she could still remember some images clearly, but as time passed, those images became difficult to recognize. The only thought that Talia could remember was a sentence that kept echoing in her mind. "Don't be controlled, don't forget, never forget." She repeated this sentence in a low voice, but it felt like there was no beginning or end. She had no idea what the reason was, and why she had to remember it. Turning her gaze to the front, Talia narrowed her eyes. Where was she? Why was she lying here? This was a simple dormitory, but the conditions were far better than that of an ordinary farmer's family. There was a notebook and a bookshelf beside her. She quickly flipped through it and found that it was filled with notes on the basic principles of magic. Talia's heart believed without any hindrance that it was her writing. At the same time, she did not doubt how she could understand Bringen. At this moment, footsteps came from outside the door. Naife pushed the door open and walked in. Seeing Talia standing in the room, her face instantly lit up. "Thank God! You're finally awake." Talia stood still and looked at her like a wooden pillar. After a few seconds, she suddenly said slowly, "You're Naife? What's wrong? Talia, are you feeling unwell?" Naife walked over and continued, "Lord Ethan said that you fainted because of the potion, but it's nothing serious. Do you have a headache now?" "Potion? What potion?" "When Lord Ethan was experimenting, the potion bottle you were holding suddenly exploded, and then you fainted too. Have you forgotten? I helped you wipe your clothes yesterday, but because there were many tasks in the laboratory, I didn't do anything when I saw you sleeping peacefully." Talia was confused. Only then did she realize that there were traces of the potion on her chest. When she heard the name, Ethan, she seemed to remember something, and it was related to magic. Looking at Naife now, she did not have much doubt. She frowned and replied, I feel like I've forgotten a lot of things. Where are we?" Hearing this question, Naife's face became serious. "Wait here, I'll go ask Lord Ethan. The problem seems to be a little serious." With that, she left the room. Before Tyrion could say anything, Wizard Ethan quickly walked over. Seeing his face, Tyrion did not feel unfamiliar at all. Instead, she instinctively felt a sense of respect. She hurriedly got up and involuntarily bowed. "Lord Mage." After bowing, she was stunned for a moment because she realized that she could not remember where she learned these etiquettes. Chapter 1205. It seems that the potion has some side effects. Do you remember who your parents are? After asking for a while, Wizard Ethan asked this question with a serious expression. Tyria opened her mouth to answer but immediately froze. Two silhouettes appeared clearly in her mind. At the same time, names were on the tip of her tongue, but it felt like there was a layer of gauze, like the content of a dream. She could not tell if it was real or not. However, seeing Wizard Ethan staring at her with a frown, she still answered, "It's Merrick and Anna." "Phew, it seems that the symptoms are not that serious." Ethan's answer made Tyria inexplicably breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that at least she remembered some things. This was much better than forgetting everything. However, Ethan quickly asked, "Then do you remember how we came to Berg Village?" "Berg Village? What is this place?" Tyria was at a loss. When she woke up, she only felt that the place was unfamiliar. She did not think that she would be in a village that she had never heard of. At this moment, Naifi began to explain. According to her, High-Order Wizard Ethan had offended the Earl during a celebration and had no choice but to dismiss his apprentices and hide in the wilderness. As Naifi was identified as an accomplice by the Earl, she was also banished. She simply joined Wizard Ethan and left with him. Originally, Tyria could have gone back and continued to be a noble lady, but she resolutely chose to break off relations with her parents and left the city with Wizard Ethan. It was said that they had traveled west for a long time before they arrived at this village and settled down there. These words made Tyria completely dumbfounded because she did not remember these things at all. However, looking at Wizard Ethan and Naifi's natural expressions, Tyria did not question anything for the time being. Rest well. It's okay if you can't remember. At least your language and word recognition skills have not changed. You just lost a period of memory. This situation has been recorded before. Perhaps you can gradually recover after a period of time. Alright, I'll go get busy. Wizard Naifi, if it's possible, come and take care of her. Alright. After a conversation, Wizard Ethan left. Naifi chatted with her for a while and told Tyria the time and place for dinner. She also advised her to go out for a walk to relax. Perhaps she would feel better. Tyria was thinking of going out, so she opened the wardrobe, put on a familiar robe, and left the house. When the working villagers saw her, they all looked at her with reverence, not daring to take the initiative to strike up a conversation. Seeing this scene, Tyria suddenly had a strange thought in her mind. They are all fake. Tyria was startled by this thought, and hurriedly stared at the peasant woman who passed by. The latter felt uncomfortable under the strange gaze and asked timidly, "Lord Mage, is there anything I can help you with? Are you a villager living here?" Yes. Tyria looked around and asked, "Then, may I ask where this place is?" 2 days later, Roddy sat in the control room and received the latest Cullen Times. The title of the front page read, "The Lassiman Nation and the Kingdom of Karen actively conduct arms trade." The second page was about demon anatomy research. The third page was about the latest magic discoveries and papers. The fourth page was about the livelihood of the people, followed by some news from various regions. The last page was about the entertainment section, such as jokes and gossip. He carefully flipped through the pages without saying a word. He only flipped to the second page and carefully pondered over every word on this page. She no longer has any doubts now. Camilla's voice came from the side. Her eyes were fixed on Tyria, who had been standing in the laboratory for a long time. For the past 2 days, whenever she had free time, she would go outside to observe the farmers. Occasionally, she would even do some strange things. But today, she had obviously given up on such attempts and had seriously immersed herself in magic research. Naifi is quite into it. Roddy glanced at the figure on the other side of the laboratory. He was surprised that the relationship between Naifi and Tyria seemed to have improved by leaps and bounds. Everyone in the control room could see that Tyria obviously trusted Naifi. She would even go along with her emotions. Through Naifi's reminder, Tyria remembered that she had fallen off a carriage. This amnesia became the reason for this amnesia. Mage Ethan said that the fall was very likely to have caused brain damage, and the potion was probably just a trigger, causing similar symptoms and so on. There was no way to verify this theory, but it sounded reasonable. Together with the seamless reaction of the villagers, Tyria finally confirmed that she should not be dreaming. Gradually, her doubts faded. Now, she had already devoted her attention to magic. Seeing that Tyria was talking to Naifi again, Camilla worriedly whispered, "Do we need to ask her to pay attention? After all, that guy is not a good person." Roddy, however, shook his head. What needs to be said has been said. The rest is up to Naifi. If she wants to care about everything, it will backfire. But she's still young. I'm afraid she doesn't have the ability to judge. If she knows what's important, she will naturally know how to judge. Trust her. That's why she's shouldering this heavy responsibility. Don't worry. Roddy gently held Camilla's hand. The latter pursed her lips and did not dare to move. She muttered in a low voice, "You trust her more than I do. If parents don't trust their children, they won't grow up." Back then, at this point, Roddy could not help but laugh and stop talking. Camilla, on the other hand, was immersed in this atmosphere. When she realized that Roddy had stopped talking, she felt inexplicably disappointed. However, she quickly adjusted her emotions and raised her eyebrows. She noticed the newspaper. In the laboratory, Mage Ethan casually placed the Cullen Daily on the table. When Tyria passed by, she turned her head to take a look and was suddenly attracted by the title. She did not dare to touch Mage Ethan's things. However, the latter noticed Tyria's concerns and said while mixing the potions, "I've finished reading the newspaper. If you want to read it, you can take it when you're resting." Tyria hurriedly bowed and thanked him. After that, she obediently put away the newspaper and waited until all the tasks for the day were done before returning to the dormitory. She took out the newspaper and started reading. Tyrion's expression didn't change in the slightest when she read the words devil. She quickly flipped to the next page. It was obvious that Tyrion had completely forgotten her original identity. She didn't even have a concept of what a devil was. Seeing this, Roddy and Krupus finally heaved a sigh of relief. However, they soon realized that Tyria's attention was focused on the third edition of the spell thesis. She eagerly read through the summary of the thesis. After that, she read the current political news word by word and selected keywords to write in her notebook. It was obvious that she was trying to build an impression of the current highest ruling structure. Soon, Roddy saw that she circled 2 words in her notebook: Cabinet and Hollier City. "I've been busy lately. I've been going to the hospital for an important matter. I'm going to be a father. To be honest, I'm quite at a loss. I'll try my best to keep up with the updates. It's just that the storm on Chidien has been quite serious lately, and I'm a little worried. I've written the beginning of the new book several times, and to be honest, I'm a little tired from the interruption of Men of No Ghosts. I have a lot of things to say. Sometimes I feel like I'm in the same state as most of my peers." End of this chapter. Chapter 1206. Talia did not realize that when she learned the language and words from the books in her home, the history she learned were all modified versions of the history of the Kingdom of Karen. Although it described the deeds of various lords and monarchs, there was never a map. In other words, no one in the entire demiplane had ever told her how big the world was, or where she was on the map. Because everything was controlled by humans, she could not ask even if she wanted to. When the way to obtain knowledge was controlled, Talia could only obtain the knowledge that others wanted her to know, and she could not cross the line at all. At this time, she was still living in such an environment. Although Wizard Ethan seemed to be knowledgeable, and Naifi often answered all kinds of difficult questions, Talia only really wanted to understand the whole world when she saw the content of the Karen Times. What is this? She had a vague impression of Hollier City, but she did not understand the political system of the human world at all. She stared blankly at the words on the front page for a long time. She seemed to know something, but she could not remember the specific content. It was a very uncomfortable feeling. Talia rubbed her temples and tried hard to remember. Just when she felt that she had finally grasped a clue, she suddenly heard a low voice. "You need to become stronger." Tyria shuddered violently and instantly bounced up from her chair. "Who?" She quickly scanned her surroundings and found that there was no one in front of her or behind her. A faint element condensed in her palm, and Tyria's heart was beating rapidly. This voice sounded very similar to her own voice, and at the same time, it was abnormally clear. It was definitely not an illusion, as if it was whispering into her ear. Talia completely forgot the things she had just remembered. Her forehead was already dripping with cold sweat, and her face was extremely pale. After confirming that there was no one here, she suddenly remembered a thought that was buried deep in her mind. Don't be controlled. Why would she remember this sentence? Who would want to control herself? Talia's brain worked quickly, and she quickly thought of a certain possibility. However, her face did not change. She took the newspaper and looked for Naifi, who lived on the other floor. As it was night time, Naifi was wearing pajamas and writing something. When he saw Talia, he was a little puzzled. What's wrong? It's just that. I feel like I've forgotten a lot of things. When I saw this newspaper. Yes, newspaper. I don't remember having such a thing before. I've only seen this recently. We didn't distribute it in our country before. I didn't know about it until I came here. Naife remained calm and took out a newspaper from 2 months ago. This is from before. I passed by a town on my way here, so I bought a copy out of curiosity. You were also reading it at that time. Have you forgotten about it? Ah? I can't remember. Tyria took it. She was very curious about what was written on it, but she suppressed her emotions and asked, I just heard someone talking in my ear, but... She clearly regarded Naife as the person she trusted the most. She explained the situation to Naife. Naife was confused after listening to her, but she did not underestimate her. She said in a low voice, Let's go ask Wizard Ethan tomorrow. If he doesn't know, then, is there any other way? Tyria also realized that Ethan was, after all, a mage, not a doctor. He was probably at his wits' end when it came to this kind of illness. She was just an apprentice, and it was not appropriate for her to let her mentor worry about such things every day. After all, she was influenced by the style and values of the Galen family. She believed that she should not owe favors if she could. After all, she could be said to be penniless now. Apart from some jewelry that she carried with her, she had no other property. Naife thought for a moment and finally pointed to the newspaper. If there's any place that can solve this problem, it's probably the city of Hollier. After all, there are the most powerful mages and all kinds of mages there. I heard that there are even dragons there. When she heard the word dragons, Tyria's eyes obviously widened. Dragons? Are they the kind that are especially powerful? Yes, but in your case, I'm afraid there's no way to ask dragons directly. To be honest, after reading the news in these newspapers, I always feel that my magic level is too low. I don't think anyone will care even if I go there. Naife explained some of the current mechanisms and the density of mages in Hollier, but the more she listened, the more Tyria felt strange. Is this city very famous before? No, I think it suddenly became famous in the last 6 months. The place we stayed before was too remote, and the news is not fast, so it's normal that we don't know about it. When we came here, you said in the carriage that you wanted to go to Hollier to have a look. Ah? Did I? Tyria was at a loss, but Naife vividly recounted the incident. Naife even described how the two of them were almost bitten by a snake when they were looking for a toilet on the way. Now that you mention it, it seems like it's true. Tyria had no idea that memories would usually fill in the gaps under a hint. After thinking about it for a long time, she finally did not question Naife because she trusted him. After all, she had no reason to question this kind of thing, and Naife had no reason to lie to her. The two talked about these problems until late at night. Seeing that Tyria did not seem to have any intention of leaving, Naife simply asked, Are you a little afraid? I am a little. Tyria's worries were exposed. After all, it was a new experience for her to suddenly hear a voice that no one else could hear. Fear of the unknown was a common emotion of all living beings. She, who was already no different from a human, also felt afraid, and instinctively looked for companions to counteract this fear. Then sleep here and have a good rest. Maybe everything will be better tomorrow. Naifei did not say anything else. He went to the cabinet next to the side and took out a spare bedding and laid it on his bed. Tyria was obviously embarrassed, but in the end, her fear won over her shyness. She whispered, "Thank you, Naifei. I really troubled you." "It's not a troublesome matter. We all have times when we are afraid, don't we? Archmage Assange once said that it is because people learn to unite that they can overcome fear. Only by helping each other can we take a step closer to the truth. It's not a troublesome matter. If I need your help, then I won't be polite." "Yes, I understand." Tyria's eyes flashed, and she seemed to be thinking about something. After that, the two washed up together and lay down on the double bed. Naifei was relaxed, but Tyria's movements were careful, and she was a little nervous. "Don't be afraid, it's safe here," Naifei said softly. Seeing that Tyria's body was still a little tense, he simply turned to face her and held Tyria's somewhat cold hand. "Don't think about those things. Why don't you think about the formation of the level 5 spell that Mage Ethan talked about today? I think about it every night and it takes about 2 minutes before I fall asleep." Pfft, Tyria couldn't help but laugh out loud, and the emotion made her finally relax. She turned her head to look at Naifei, her eyes shining in the darkness. End of this chapter. Chapter 1207. By the end of September, all the wheat fields in the kingdom of Karen had been harvested. In this year of favorable weather, the selection of seeds and the implementation of the plowing system allowed the kingdom to have an unprecedented harvest. Compared to the past, the grain output was more than 3 times higher. For the cabinet, which had begun to reform the tax system, this meant that the national treasury was greatly enriched. In this era, most taxes were levied directly from the grain. In order to prevent the sharp reduction of grain prices from hurting the interests of the farmers, the cabinet also set a minimum purchase price to ensure the stability of the grassroots of society. Although there were some minor adjustments and losses, the rapid development covered most of the problems. At present, all the classes were happy. Even the nobles who secretly colluded with each other for a coup had temporarily stopped because they had earned enough money. The small nobles and the common people were very realistic. No one would overthrow a stable regime that could provide them with a comfortable life and did not have to fight all day long. Not to mention that this regime had the highest military level in the world. Looking at the power of various weapons in the newspaper and the results of the battles, everyone knew what would happen if they went against the regime with a bow and a sword. Under such circumstances, the kingdom of Karen could be said to have ushered in the fastest period of development in its history. Because even the people at the bottom of the hierarchy were gradually experiencing the benefits brought by the changes in technology and magic. After the surplus grain was purchased, the farmers who had extra money and grain began to go to the towns to buy daily necessities that could not be bought before. Some villages even began to raise funds to buy and build large machinery, such as hydraulic mills. After the process of the improvement of the technology and the use of more precise metal bearings, the efficiency of these things increased, and the price dropped. Now, the threshold for the use of these things was greatly reduced. The small landowners, who had been counting on the income from their land, now began to set their sights on the new businesses that kept popping up in the city. Because of the advancement of magic technology, these people could be said to have entered the market early and left early. Now that the wind was blowing, they only needed to invest in it and they would be able to reap countless times the returns. Sorcerers were not very interested in making money. Now, like bees in a beehive, they were all busy with their own research. But it was this behavior, like a fusion reaction, that accelerated the progress of the whole magic world at a rapid speed, rapidly advancing the level of human understanding of the world. This was a tremendous and formless power. Not a single mage would think about what the future of the kingdom or even the human race would be like. However, their incredibly efficient way of learning and improving was more like an engine that drove the entire human world forward. Trucks, trains, roads, and even ships and airplanes were rapidly iterating. The transportation system around Elson, Hollier, and the royal city was constantly improving. Because there was no shortage of grain, a large number of people at the bottom of the hierarchy began to leave the farmland to work in the mines and coal field. Black smoke rose as if a god pressed the fast-forward button for the humans of the Kingdom of Karen. The southern port, which had been built from scratch, rapidly expanded and flourished. The technicians from Lashiman had already guided the shipbuilding team of the Kowloon Kingdom to build a large dock. However, they did not completely use the traditional shipbuilding techniques of Lashiman. Instead, with the help of various kinds of magic machinery, they used the traditional structure as the foundation to build steel warships that could be driven by steam power and crystal energy. This news was even of the kingdom of this, of the kingdom of the were of. It was a scene of prosperity everywhere, and the small conflicts in the cabinet could not affect the overall situation at all. There were no rebellions in the kingdom, and the occasional vicious incidents were quickly dealt with. Furthermore, with the efforts of the propaganda organization, these incidents were set as examples, which further increased the prestige of the central government. However, the people in the Kingdom of Karen had a deep understanding of this change. For countries that had broken away from the transportation system, such as the undead Tasman Empire and the small countries in the east, the Kingdom of Karen seemed to only have developed more caravans. They knew nothing else. When Roddy picked up the latest report, he blinked and sighed. "I almost forgot about this guy." "Who?" Camilla leaned over from her chair and moved closer to Roland. "The orcs attacked and occupied Fort Russ." "Orcs? Are they the ones you chased away?" Sauron's figure appeared in Roddy's mind. Although the orc leader was not as strong as Roddy now, he could be called a hero in terms of ability. Ever since he led the defeated army across the Kingdom of Karen and escaped from the territory, Roddy did not pay much attention to their movements. After all, the investigation range of the intelligence agency did not extend that far. The news he received now was actually something that happened 3 months ago. Fort Russ was a few mountains away from the eastern border of Karen. The straight-line distance was more than 200 miles, so the news was most likely brought back by a caravan. Roddy did not need to worry about it, but there were some details written at the end of the report. The orc army was unstoppable in the battle. The defending soldiers could not resist at all, and the fort was declared lost within a day. This immediately reminded Roddy of the history of the orcs. They originally appeared in this world as the vanguard of the demons. Back then, these guys destroyed most of the cities of the High Elves under the state of magic suppression. After the demons were repelled, they scattered in this world. After regaining their sanity, they evolved and multiplied over countless years, and became what they were today. This cannot be left unattended. The connection between them and the demons is probably closer than the connection between Teflon and the demons. Maybe Kazvara has regained control over them in some way. After a brief thought, Roddy made a decision. Camilla asked, "Should we contact Sodeler now?" Sodeler had finally returned to the Kingdom of Karen by plane half a month ago. Because of his outstanding military achievements, he had been rewarded by Sally I and was made an earl and given a territory. However, the current earl was completely different from the previous lords, be it in terms of power or control. This was also a necessary measure taken by the central government to prevent the local authorities from rebelling. For Roddy, this brother who had fought side by side with him was actually the #1 boss in the military. Sodeler had enough political wisdom to voluntarily hand over his power. Now, only when the cabinet collectively wrote a letter of authorization with the signature and seal of Queen Sally I, could Sodeler have the power to lead the army into battle. Otherwise, he would never step into the military camp. Chapter 1208. The Kingdom of Karen was now in a period of strong development. A stable foundation was the prerequisite for the country's future prosperity. If they could live peacefully for the next 10 years, as long as the class structure and corruption were not so serious, the country's foundation for the next 100 years could be guaranteed. But this could only be judged if the dimensional war had not broken out. Roddy was most afraid that Kasvara would not give the world time to react. Every minute and every second now was fought for by him and the dragons. If the demons successfully invaded and launched a large-scale war, the whole world would probably be wiped out like Europe after the Black Death. How many people would be left was another matter. To be cautious, Roddy intended to deal with the orcs' strange movements seriously. He wrote to Sodeler specifically. His purpose was not only to deal with the orcs, but also to build a military base in a faraway place. This sounded a bit like what the hegemonic countries on Earth often did. But in fact, this was actually a better choice for the Kingdom of Karen, whose military was far superior to the current times. Although the military level of the small countries in the East was not high, because of the climate and geographical conditions, their population and resources were not inferior to the southeast of the Kingdom of Karen, which was the level of the former royal area. Direct invasion would naturally cause a backlash from other countries, but using the excuse of clearing out the orcs, taking the opportunity to build sentry posts, or even cultivate a puppet regime, then directly absorbing resources from these countries, releasing inflation pressure, and so on, was naturally not a problem. The only premise was that their current regime was stable. Roddy was in a daze for a while. He was not a brilliant politician, let alone a politician. It was just that in this position, thinking about these things was not something he was passionate about. "Do you need a pen and paper now?" Camilla asked. Roddy shook his head. "Let's talk about it at night. I'll go back and write it." Seeing that he was a little tired, Camilla whispered, "Is it hard to deal with?" "It's just that sometimes it's meaningless. Although we have planes, cannons, and the support of the dragons, these wars with the demons are no different from animals fighting for territory and hunting," Roddy sighed helplessly. "If I could survive without eating, who would care about these things? But some things just can't be helped." He turned his eyes to the screen in front of him and said in a low voice, "These characteristics that the demons are showing now actually show that they are not considered higher life than humans, and even inferior to humans in some aspects. It's more like an ant colony or a swarm of bees." As the leader, he can command everything, while the low-level individuals will firmly guard their posts and carry out orders when they receive them. This was not just a conclusion obtained from observing Tyria, but also the result of the current research of the dragons and mages on the demons. Due to the continuous invasions, there were many demons who entered this plane and were captured alive. As time passed, the habits and weaknesses of the demons were gradually discovered. Camilla raised her eyebrows. "But it sounds like they're much more powerful than humans. After all, it's impossible for our army to be like ants or a swarm of bees that have nearly 100% execution ability. Mutiny and low morale could lead to defeat, but this problem did not seem to exist in the minds of the demons. In the era of cold weapons, they are indeed strong. Just like Tasman's undead army, endless numbers can drown everything. But the weakness of this method is also very obvious. When we fight a war, the death of a commander will affect morale, but through certain methods, there will always be a backup commander who can take over and rely on various methods to stabilize morale and continue to carry out orders. But the demons are completely different. As long as they kill a squad leader, then the subordinates under their control will completely fall into a state of chaos, and it's even possible for them to kill each other. Camilla did not say anything. After a long time, she said, I'm afraid that once they realize this weakness, they will gradually overcome it. Roddy pointed at Taria on the screen. That's why we need her. Naturally, Taria, who was being pointed at, was unaware of what was happening in the outside world. She was currently walking on the hills of Berg Village, holding a rattan basket in her hand. Beside her, Naifei carried a blanket and asked curiously, Why are you thinking of going on an outing? We're finally done with the recent matters. While Wizard Ethan isn't here, shouldn't we find a chance to rest? She was wearing a brown linen robe, and her long hair was scattered. She found a slightly higher ground and stopped. Let's do it here. The scenery is very good. Willing to go on an outing? That's not like you in the past. Naifei spread the blanket on the ground, and Taria put down the rattan basket in her hand. She began to take out different kinds of food from it. These were not exotic delicacies, but the simplest cheese, bread, sausages, and fruit. Phew, I feel like I'm going to grow moldy after staying in the Mage Tower all day. Taria smiled as she laid out the food. She even took out 2 clay cups from the rattan basket and poured some water into them. This was obviously the style of a noble lady. Naifei could not help but be speechless. She took the cup and looked left and right. Suddenly, she said, Now that there's no one around, do you have something to say? Taria nodded. She moved closer to Naifei and whispered, Recently, I've been hearing that voice in the Magic Tower, so I want to verify if it only appears in the Magic Tower, and if it's blocked outside. After saying that, she raised her hand and removed a leaf stuck to Naifei's hair. Her movement was very natural. Because of their close proximity, when Naifei turned her face, she seemed to be only a few centimeters away from her. Taria did not realize that there was anything wrong with this. These days, she and Naifei had almost become good friends who talked about everything, and their relationship was much closer than before. The situation still hasn't improved? Then, will there be any difference here? Will it feel better when you relax? I don't know. It always feels like there's no pattern. Taria suddenly froze like a statue. After a few seconds, she shivered and said with a trembling voice, I don't know. His voice trembled as he said, Here it comes again. This voice always wants me to learn plain magic as if that thing is very important. Last time it was the node of a magic circle, this time it's plain spells. Naifei looked at her pale face and knew that Taria was indeed afraid. She reached out and stroked her back. Naifei continued, Could it be that there's something in your heart that you want to achieve? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.